Very good morning to you. Thank you for joining us bright and early on this Tuesday morning for our latest PiP webinar series. Today we're looking at education buildings and school architecture from across the UK. Case studies will come from architectural experts examining architectural buildings and education buildings and school architecture. As with our previous seminars on other typologies, this seminar hopes to explore how collaboration between architects, consultants and manufacturers can help in creating better designed, inspiring and sustainable education buildings. Now this is obviously, education buildings are obviously a topic close to my heart, seeing as I've got a picture here of the Sheffield Arts Tower sitting on my bedroom wall. And certainly during my education, the likes of Hermann Hertzberger schools were really instrumental in my learning about education buildings and how the best ones might be designed. The Amsterdam Apollo schools, like the Willems Park School in 1983, felt like a kind of a total environment for learning, not just in the classrooms, but also in the kind of the play spaces immediately outside it, and what Hermann Hertzberger did in order to kind of create spaces for engagement and play outside of the classroom environment. And what he kind of made me aware of at that young age was how the space itself, even interstitial spaces, can become part of the educational process. It's nice to know that since last year, those Apollo schools have actually been given municipal monument status in Amsterdam, which shows how important they are really to in the cultural life of the city as well. Other projects that kind of come to mind for me is certainly the work of Hampshire County architects who worked from the late 1980s with Sir Colin Stansfield Smith and later on the late Alec Gillies, and the work that they did across Hampshire. I remember probably when I just started the RIBAJ Journal, at a school, Durn Pyramidal School, that they worked on for special educational needs, which was a fantastic space in as much as it was both vaulted and also had amazing spaces to kind of draw children away if they were kind of experiencing distress, and into very, very small kind of like niche spaces underneath this kind of pyramidal vaulted roof. And it was a beautiful space to see children playing within it. I think that kind of aspect of education has been certainly picked up by Sarah Wigglesworth in her school, Sandal Magna, the Mellor Forest School that I went to see outside Manchester, and her Takeley Primary Schools, which kind of pick up on the idea of how you can use space and materials to make the school building a pedagogical tool. We've got a number of speakers today talking about their designs and the input of design on educational buildings, from primary schools to university faculties, post schools. But I think the point about all of them, especially, you know, we've got the Gollins, Melbourne and Ward building behind us, is that a good building facilitates the educational process. And that doesn't matter what age you are, whether it be 4 or 40. Just in terms of kind of giving you orientating you to this actual session, these presentations are going to be interspersed with project presentations will be interspersed with short CPD presentations from our sponsors. We'll have a short break at around 10 AM and resume 10 minutes later. At the end of the seminar, around 11:20, there's opportunity for you to field any final questions, or that you can ask questions immediately after the seminar. And if there's any burning issues you wish to discuss, please post them and they'll be communicated to me and we can discuss them. I'll discuss them directly with the presenters. We'll go to our first speaker now, 9:05. Tim Gill, author of The Urban Playground and the Design Council Built Environment expert. He's an advocate for children's outdoor play and mobility. He spent decades researching the subject. His latest book, Urban Playground, How Child-Friendly Planning and Design Can Save Cities, was published by the RIBA in 2021. I believe, Charmian, if you're listening, that there's apparently a discount voucher for that book should people wish to purchase it through the RIBA publishing. His first book, No Fear, Growing Up in a Risk-Averse Society, was described by the New York Times as a handbook for movement in freer, riskier play. Tim is a design council built environment expert, Churchill Fellow, and former director of Play Council, now Play England. His client list includes Argent, the London Legacy Development Corporation, the Mayor of London, GLA, and the National Trust. If you get time, do take a look at his website, rethinkingchildhood.com. It looks like an amazing resource read, not just a blog of his own personal thoughts, but of other information that you can get about the design of play spaces. So take a look at it if you can. I think what Tim seems to be talking about is the ideas of risk in play. I always remember, you know, when I was a kid, when you got a kind of a toolkit like your dad's, it was always kind of mini saws and mini hammers, but they were actually real things. We seem to have converted that to plastic ones as part of kind of dealing with reducing risk for children. I think Tim would probably argue that that's probably the wrong way to go, but I'll leave that to him to say. Certainly my big inspirations, and I just was mentioning them to him now, were the Amsterdam playgrounds of Aldo van Eyck, which are amazing spaces in as much as they don't treat children like fools. They actually create riskier spaces for them. You know, if one of his playgrounds was by a road, he used to kind of build rockeries around the outside in order to stop children going there. So there was an idea that children can kind of have sensory learning themselves and learn about their spaces immediately and learn about the risks involved in traversing those spaces. So after decades spent researching his specialisation and being a Churchill scholar, he's seen a lot of examples in the course of his research, and I hope you're here today, Tim, to give us a small insight into some of your findings and observations in the world of play spaces from a global perspective. Over to you, Tim.
Thank you very much, Carlos, and thank you, Reba, as well, for inviting me. I will just do the screen sharing thing, oh, that's not where I want it to be. Okay, I'm going to have to do a little bit of rewind, and here we are. So I'm going to hardly say anything about school buildings. I'm going to say a bit about school grounds, and there'll be implications for what I'm saying in terms of school grounds. I'm going to be saying a bit more about the role and the place of the school in child-friendly neighbourhoods, but I want to kind of start by thinking about what we even mean by this term child-friendly. And I think when we're thinking about children's lives today, one good place to start is to think about our own childhoods and the kind of places that were important to us and the meanings that these places had in our younger lives. So I'm going to invite you to just have a look at this map. You can see, so this a map that shows you what you might call the roaming range, or the right to roam, of 4 children at the age of 8 years old who all lived in the same city. But they happen to be 4 children who are in 4 generations of the same family. And so what you can see, that the big blob that takes up most of the map, that's the roaming range of the great-grandfather in this family. At the age of 8, he could go 6 miles across the city on his own. And you can see how the circles shrink until you can see that dot over the yellow dot at the top left. That's the son, who he's actually allowed to go to the end of his street. And that's more everyday freedom than most children get. And in fact, on this very morning, you'll find a story, a news story in The Guardian, documenting exactly this change at a population level. Now, most of what I do is about responding to, reflecting on and responding to this change, which I think is one of the most profound and underexplored changes in the nature of childhood. And in doing that, I'm not saying that we have to turn the clock back or that there was some golden age to grow up, but I think what this map points to is a kind of an important ingredient of a good enough childhood, which is that opportunity to gradually explore, play, get around one's neighbourhood, and in doing so, get to grips with the people and places around us, and stake our claim as being full citizens of our communities. And I think these experiences are disappearing from the lives of children today, and that is something that we should do something about. And that part of the reason for this, not the whole reason, but part of the reason is about the way we build our built environment, about the built form of our human habitats. So, what do I mean by child-friendly planning? Well, the planner Brent Toderian, who used to be chief planner in Vancouver, talks about family-friendly neighbourhoods as being, in effect, built on 3 platforms or planks. And the first is obviously housing. If there isn't appropriate family housing in a neighbourhood, then it's game over. The second plank is indeed services, schools, childcare, and so on, also crucial, of course, for families. But then there's this third plank, which is the public realm, the spaces, play spaces, parks, civic spaces, streets that make up a neighbourhood. And while you could say that that's not kind of essential for families moving into a neighbourhood, it is clearly the case that families will only stay in neighbourhoods, if they have any choice, if they do feel that the public realm is welcoming. So it's actually that third plank, the public realm, that I focus on in my work, because I think it raises some of the most interesting questions about the relationship between children as they grow up and the built environment. So that's the context, if you like. My definition, my working definition of a child-friendly neighbourhood is shown in this diagram. And what this is really showing is that there are 2 dimensions to a child-friendly place. One of the dimensions, and Carlos alluded to it, is things to do, play spaces, nature, sports facilities, that a neighbourhood has got a variety of offers, or you could say affordances. But that's not enough. There's another dimension as well, and that's the children's mobility dimension. And it is only where you have both high levels of child mobility. In simple terms, it's easy for children to get around on foot or by bike or by scooter these days. And you have a rich set of offers within a neighbourhood, that you're in that quadrant of the child-friendly neighbourhood or the child-friendly city. And I've been lucky enough, as Carlos mentioned, to have the chance to study a number of cities that have implicitly or explicitly adopted this approach and have put serious time and effort into making the built form of their city more child-friendly. You can see a set of cities there. They're quite a mix in Europe, Middle East, and North and South America. And I'm going to be sharing with you just a little bit of my findings from visiting and studying these cities. So I'm going to try and make that definition that I just shared with you more concrete by pointing to one district that in my book, I make the case for being perhaps the ultimate child-friendly neighbourhood. And that's the eco-suburb of Vauban in Freiburg in southern Germany, well known to urban designers and master planners. I've been lucky enough to visit this district twice over the years. You can see it's sort of medium density, it's apartment living, about 5,000 or 6,000 people living. So it's a decent chunk of the city of Freiburg. And the first thing that I want to draw your attention to is that it's in effect a car-free development. So in fact, you can own a car if you live in Vauban, but if you do, you have to park your car in one of 3 peripheral car parks. So it means that the whole of the space between the buildings is available for social and other uses. And you can see a hint of that on that image of one of the streets in Vauban on the right. So just a few more images. There is one of the car parks. There is great public transport, which of course reduces the need for a car in the first place. But then when you start looking and walking around Vauban, what becomes apparent is just how much of the outdoor space is attractive, green, sociable, and enjoyable. And both of the times that I visited, one of the most striking features is just the number of people out and about, including children, children of different ages, with and without their parents. And here's another image of the streets. Of course, once you take the cars away, streets become eminently walkable and cyclable. So in my book, I pull up together some of the kind of key design features of this neighbourhood in a sort of idealised version. I'm not going to talk to all of those features, but I will draw you to the two at the top left. And in essence, in this rendering, the school is at the heart of the neighbourhood. And not only that, but the school is a resource, and the spaces, indoor but particularly outdoor spaces of the school, are also resources that are available for open public access and community use. So, and I'm sure you can understand how that links to that those two dimensions of child-friendly planning and design that I've already mentioned. So that's like the first concrete vision. I'm just going to quickly share just one other, I think, interesting case study, and that's the City of Rotterdam. The story of Rotterdam is fascinating. So about 15 years ago, there was an authoritative survey of Dutch cities that found that Rotterdam was the worst city in the Netherlands to bring up a child. And anybody who knows anything about Dutch culture will know that that really is not a league table that you want to be at the bottom of. And to their credit, the Dutch city leaders realized that they had to do something about this. So they instituted a number of strategic, ambitious programs involving millions of euros of spending to essentially give neighborhoods a makeover and improve and improve both the mobility and the things to do in the neighborhood. So here's a one particularly dramatic set of interventions. So this is one relatively disadvantaged part of the City of Rotterdam, it's to the north of the city centre. And there was a whole, in effect, a child-friendly layer of interventions in the streets, in school grounds, so opening up school grounds, design, open spaces, community gardens, play spaces, traffic management, all coming together to elevate both the status of children and children's mobility and choice within that neighbourhood. So that's the picture I want you to have in your minds when I'm talking about this idea of child friendliness. Briefly, I want to explain why this idea matters, and in particular, why the cities that I visited thought that it mattered. So this is, if you like, not me speaking, this is my findings from those dozen or so cities. And broadly speaking, the city's interest and engagement in this topic clustered around three themes. The first theme was around, if you like, children's rights, children's health, children's well-being. So it was about the benefits and the significance for children. But then there was a second cluster of cities that actually saw links between child friendliness and sustainability. And one way of seeing this is that they grasped the insight that if you ask yourself what a child-friendly neighborhood or child-friendly city looks like, it looks a lot like a sustainable neighborhood. It's compact, it's green, it's easy to get around. Things that we need are close to hand. It's the 15-minute neighborhood idea that we're hearing a lot about now. So that's a second set of cities. And then there was a third set of cities, like Rotterdam, who were actually made a hard-nosed connection between child friendliness and the, if you like, the economic prospects of their city. And they grasped the insight that, to put it simply, if you are a city that is not able to attract and retain families, then your long-term economic and demographic future is bleak. So the interesting thing about this Venn diagram is, as you can see, most of the cities that I visited actually kind of fall somewhere in the middle. They could see win-wins. They could see joint benefits in terms of creating more child-friendly places. But I do just want to briefly talk about children themselves. And one of the striking things that we find, those of us who work in child-friendly planning design, is that children around the world are remarkably consistent about what they tell us around making places more, the things that they like and that they don't like about cities. And you can see a summary of those views there, and it really maps very closely onto the framework that I've offered already. So that's the sort of context and background, and if you like, my working construction of child-friendly planning design. I'm just going to say a little bit about what this means in terms of schools and school building initiatives and schemes. And I appreciate some of this may be peripheral to the concerns of some of you in the audience, or maybe with your current projects, but I hope you'll see that they raise some important questions, maybe about the strategic thinking around schools and the wider picture of schools as buildings. So obviously there's a clear implication around the location of schools, and I don't need to dwell too much on that. Also, some clear implications around school design, access and management. It's long been a bugbear of mine that in so many communities, school grounds are amongst the only places that are actually comparatively suitable for children to play out. But they're all too often, in the UK at least, locked and gated for the vast majority of the year. Also clear implications for active travel. That's both about routes to and from school, but also the facilities that are included as part of a school building program. So there's cycle storage and all the rest of it. Also want to say a quick word about engagement. I'm thinking particularly of engagement of children and young people. In my book, I make the case for what I call effective engagement. Historically, children's consultation and involvement has been either non-existent or perhaps tokenistic, or it's been sort of wildly overambitious. And I think we need to get smarter about how children are involved in projects. That word effective means that we think about the questions we want to ask children, we think about who we want to hear the answers, but we don't expect children to fix cities or to fix neighborhoods or to fix schools. That's our job as adults, but in doing so we need to take into account the lived experiences and the views and concerns of children. And that leads on to that final point here about the school as a catalyst. I think some of the cities that I visited, the school and school leaders, school head teachers and management were voices, advocates for improving children's wider lives, and were very aware of some of the challenges, particularly in disadvantaged areas, that children and families face, and could be potentially strong advocates for things like school streets. These are short, time-limited restrictions in traffic outside schools, but also for improvements in the wider neighbourhood. So just a few examples from my travels. Actually, this is not. You check out this video on YouTube. It's if you like, it's the sort of reductio ad absurdam of the school, sort of in a sprawling suburb, miles from anywhere. It's a sort of grotesque distortion of the kind of place and role that schools should have. But let's move to the positive. I used this in my opening slide. So this is a naturalistic public access schoolyard in that Rotterdam neighbourhood that I talked about earlier. And as Carlos hinted, some of this approach raises some interesting questions about risk and about how we face up to the, if you like, the trade-offs, the risks and the benefits of expanding children's horizons and allowing children greater freedom. And surely, if we've learned anything in the last year about, through our experience of the pandemic, well, firstly, we've learned about the importance of public space, but I think we've also learned that, managing risks is complicated. There's rarely one simple answer to the question, what is safe? And indeed, we are doing ourselves and our children a disservice if we oversimplify and overprotect. Second, a project, this is Crosstown Elementary School in Vancouver. Vancouver is particularly interesting because for decades it's had a program of firstly attracting families to the downtown, and secondly its school building program always aims to create shared access outdoor spaces. So this school playground that you can see is open to the public 24/7. And this is in not so far away from some fairly rough parts of downtown Vancouver, and yet there's never been any issues with this. Finally, I just want to mention a wonderful project. It's not directly a kind of capital project. This is a children's involvement program in Oslo in Norway, where children were asked to give their views on their trip to school, on the things that they like and they don't like, on the problems they face. And they did so using a very well-designed mobile phone app, which transmitted information directly to the City Council Highways team, and indeed a dedicated team of 3 officers who were then able to respond to some of their concerns. So if we start pulling this together, I think we're looking at an idea that is, as I've already mentioned, going in the direction of travel of a lot of strategic urban thinking. And this is the example of the 15-minute neighbourhood programme in Paris. So, as I said at the beginning, these are not really technical issues. They're not even design issues, first and foremost. They're moral and political issues. They're about who public space is for. I make the case, and I believe it, that child-friendly places are clearly healthy, sustainable and livable places. I hope by now you've got this framework of the 2 dimensions of child-friendly places. And I just want to close by suggesting that one of the interesting things for me is to see how much this becomes a personal issue, particularly for people working in the built environment, that they can see the connection between particularly professionals who are starting to have children or bringing up children themselves in the city and these wider goals. So I will close with a brief sales pitch. As Carlos mentioned, my book is out. You'll find out much more about my arguments in there. And if you buy, I think by the end of the week, using the code URBANP8 on the RIBAJ bookstore, you will get an £8 discount. Other books on urban design are available. Thank you very much.
Technologies is modifying the way that children use the public realm. I'm slightly more mindful of the idea that there's a certain element of commercialization goes into things like Pokemon Go, but I just was interested in how you think the internet is kind of modifying how children...
Sure. It's a really good question, and I guess the short version of the story is that the growth of our digital lives, and particularly in children, is both a symptom and a cause of the retreat of children from the outdoors. So children are sponges for experience, and particularly for social contact with their peers and friends. And to put it simply, if they're not able to have that social contact IRL in real life, then they will pursue it in the online world. And I think we can see that's been happening probably for 15, 20 years. Certainly, I can remember, young people 10 or 15 years ago on MSN. So that's part of the story. I think that it is also clearly the case that the digital content producers, social media in particular, are interested in making sure all of us spend as much time as possible on these devices. And I think there are important questions there. But children and young people do subvert and kind of play with technology. And so Pokemon Go is perhaps a top-down example, but there's some interesting work on children's own creative use of things like skateboarders videoing their performances and sharing that, and all of that kind of the documentation and reliving and re-understanding of the experience, which is fascinating, a bit beyond my core territory. But I guess one final thing, during lockdown, surely one of the things we've realized, those of us who spend any time with children, is that idea that the outdoors and that getting outside is not important to children, that has been shown to be a myth. It has not been sufficient for children to just rely upon the digital world for their social lives. And there's now growing evidence of mental health and emotional problems amongst particularly teenagers as a result of that lockdown experience.
Just one other question. I'm mindful of the time, but I was interested in the idea whether, because you were talking about certain cities, and I was already seeing associations in your Venn diagram. I just wonder, is there like an optimum size city that kind of works in terms of thinking, because I look at Tel Aviv and Barcelona and think, well, it's kind of a no-brainer in a way that some school, that places like that probably are going to be more child-friendly to some extent. They've got the sea, but it's interesting that Ghent and Freiburg kind of make the perfect intersection. I kind of think, well, there's small cities. Is it anything as crass as the size of a city that actually affects its livability, really, for children?
I don't think so. I mean, I can hear Jane Jacobs in the background saying, you know, the perfect size of a city is 100,000 or whatever she said in The Death and Life. I'm a bit more skeptical of that. But what I will say, and what I make the case for in the book, is that children and families don't live in cities, they live in neighbourhoods. So really all of this, the unit of analysis, if you like, is, you know, in terms of the built environment, is the neighbourhood. And of course, that raises as many questions as it answers. But because what is a neighbourhood and how do you define it and how do you split it up? But it was a real feature of some of those programs in some of the cities that I looked at, was that they were alive. The municipality and the municipal programs were alive to the way people understand neighborhood and to the boundaries and the geography of where they live. And Rotterdam was quite a good example of that. Antwerp was another. And Vancouver was another, actually. So I think that's a takeaway. It's not so much the overall size of the city, but the city's ability to plan their interventions in ways that are sensitive to the way ordinary people live in ordinary neighbourhoods.
That's fantastic. I mean, we could go on about it for hours. I'm really sorry we're going to cut you short, but I thought it was really lovely. The question you said, if playgrounds is the answer, what's the question? And I think hopefully if people do go to your book, Urban Playgrounds, they hopefully get some answers or some scope of what that answer might be. But it's a fascinating subject. It's lovely to imagine the city from the eyes of a child as well, because I think if you can do that, then actually you can begin to change your urban realm fundamentally. It's a completely different way of thinking about the city. So thank you very much indeed for your talk. Great meeting you, and later at some point maybe we'll be.
And I'll be back actually for RIBA members doing some CPD. I think it's the 7th of May, so people are welcome to join me at that point as well.
Okay, excellent. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Carlos.
Thank you. Cheers.
Bye, everyone.
Yes, sorry, we're running a bit late. That's my fault. Apologies for that. We are now moving on to our first sponsored presentation, which is coming from Justin Lewis, who is a technical specification manager for Rockwool UK. He's got construction expertise spanning 14 years, has spent since 2008 with Rockwool, and he focuses on flat roof solutions that address thermal, fire and acoustic performance requirements. He provides support to architects and contractors, including CPDs, and project-specific support with technical calculations and guidance on the best solutions required to deliver regulatory compliance. Rockwell insulation, I think most of us will know, it's a naturally occurring volcanic diabase rock, which is smelted and spun into fibres to create a wide selection of insulation materials, which are both insulation and thermal insulation and acoustic. And also apparently subsea pipelines, which I'm intrigued about, didn't know about that one. I believe you're talking about Cobham Free School, which opened in 2012. It's the first building in the former Cobham police station in Surrey. And its former Monroe House is now the main school site completed over lockdown and designed for Key Stage 2 and seniors to the age of 18. I took a look at it actually online, and it's a Pomo vernacular style office with an amazing marble reception area apparently. I don't know whether that survived the redesign by Stride Treglown architects recently to give it 2 new wings with a refectory recital room and a sports hall for 920 pupils. Justin, maybe you can tell us if the marble reception area is still there.
Thank you, Carlos. I'm not sure if it is. But I haven't been there since it's been completed, but certainly last time I visited the office, yes, the marble was there and it did look fantastic. So I'm kind of fingers crossed that it has remained. But yeah, thank you for the introduction.
Thank you.
So yeah, case study on Cobham Free School. As Carlos said, obviously, I'm from Rockwell Insulation, and obviously thank RIBA for the opportunity of inviting us along today. So Rockwell Insulation, obviously our main product is insulation, but obviously we do a number of different things across the group, from ceiling tiles to industrial applications, and obviously undersea pipelines, etc. as well. Obviously we look, as Carlos indicated, to offer fire protection, thermal insulation, and deal with acoustic queries, and obviously in particular with Cobham Free School, acoustics under BB93 was one that raised its head quite highly. So the project itself, as Carlos has indicated, is an extension to an existing building with 2 new large blocks being added to either end, as you can see in the diagram here. It included a 520-seat auditorium. There was a new dining hall facility, a recital room, a sports hall, fitness and dance suite, along with accommodating changing facilities. And obviously all of these have a requirement under BB93 with different requirements for each area. Obviously not just taking the roof into account for acoustics, but the walls as well. So it was quite a challenging project with some of the requirements that they had, along with some of the other requirements that I'll come on to in a second. So the challenge that we were faced with was obviously to look at complying with BS 6229. So the flat roof with continuously supported flexible waterproof coverings guidance. We then had the discussion around BB93 and the acoustic designs of schools. Obviously from a manufacturer's perspective, this is one thing that we often see is overlooked and not thought of, we don't feel, in depth enough. Obviously acoustics play a very important part, especially in the learning process of children. And I know when I go many years back now to when I was in school, I recall the days that, you know, if a classroom was out of action because of a leaking flat roof, shall we say, we'd have to use the sports hall area for a lesson. And if you were sat at the back of the sports hall, which many people, including myself, would like to have done back then, you wouldn't hear anything the teacher was saying because the acoustics were not achieved and they weren't satisfactory. Hence why the introduction of BB93 came in back in 2008. We then had the challenge of BB100, obviously ensuring the fire safety aspect was also reviewed and taken care of within the build of the project. So 3 documents that I mentioned, obviously are highlighted here. So the solution that we had was our Rockwell Hard Rock Multi-Fix dual density roof board. Over 2,000 square meters were used on the school, and in the one product alone, it satisfied the acoustic, thermal and fire requirements. Obviously every room, as I mentioned, obviously in the BB93, which I'm sure you guys are aware, has or can have a different requirement. And you've often got an internal ambient noise level you have to achieve, obviously a rain noise requirement and an internal absorption requirement. Obviously, as we look at each room, each classroom type, we had to address each scenario differently with the main contractor and Stride Trevlown. And we came up with the solution that the Rockwell system was the best fit, and it satisfied all the requirements, including the rain noise criteria. Where we came to the sports hall area, and I think I recall an element of the dining area where there was an exposed soffit with a perforated deck. We obviously introduced the Rockwell Acoustic Infills, which took care of the internal absorption levels. As we can see a comment here from the designer of the roofing contractor, that obviously it streamlined the process using one product. They didn't have to worry about trying to coordinate different zones with different material types. It was one product, satisfied the acoustic, fire and thermal performance that was required. So we kind of naturally value engineered the project from a roof design. I know when I first got involved, there was various products being used in varying areas. We had a number of different constructions, quite onerous in some respects, with regards layers of plywood, perhaps cement particle board were included in certain areas, and then high mass barrier membranes, just trying to combat the acoustic requirement of the project. Obviously, when I was able to present to the main contractor with a lunch and learn CPD, the architects were in the room at the time, and there was a lot of questions that came at the end about, you know, are we sure that we can achieve in removing these layers of ply, the acoustic barrier mats? Will the product suffice in its own for the acoustic performance? Obviously, we have the data, a suite of data to be able to back that up with many different acoustic criteria being achieved. We then went on to the BB100 element, where obviously BB100 guides that the envelope for an education facility is predominantly looked at to be designed with non-combustible materials to the envelope. Obviously, that is something that we obviously took on board, and we could guide correctly, ensuring the compartment lines were dealt with as needed to ensure if there was a fire in the roof, it wouldn't spread right the way across the roof system. Obviously, with a full Rockwell system in place, that is obviously taken care of. It also gave us the opportunity to discuss where there's maintenance equipment on the roof. When there's an access route to that maintenance equipment, if a maintenance operative is working on that equipment, servicing it, they need safe time to escape across that roof system and down from that roof space, which the Rockwell system gives them that time to do. Typically in this scenario, they were looking for 60 minutes. With the system in place, we actually provided 120 minutes. So everything was ticked off quite nicely with the requirements. And again, a comment here from Andy of Southern Industrial, saying that it's become more, flat roofing systems have become more complex in recent years. obviously bringing things in like BB93, BB100, you've got to have the test evidence to be able to back up the claims. As I say, we've spent a lot of time testing our product with varying systems, and obviously using the Rockwell system, it was the robust solution without the need for any additional mass layers. I'm hoping there should be one piece. No, sorry, this comment hasn't come up again. It's a comment from Andy Towns. Sorry, where is it? There it is. So as it was compared with other installations, they found Rockwell much simpler to install. Historically, they had sort of looked at other products as opposed to using Rockwell in the past, as they always thought that it was difficult to install, not a simple process. But again, we worked with them from start to finish. As soon as they were appointed as the subcontractor, we ensured that all the detailing was correct, the phasing on site, made sure that everything rang through correctly, ensuring the project got what it needed at the correct time. So the solutions that were provided by us. So the first part of the main product is the Rockwell Hard Rock Multi-Fix Dual Density Board. So it's a versatile non-combustible solution for insulating flat roofs, and we can also provide it in tapered form. The white fleece attached to the top of the product ensures full compatibility with a wide range of waterproofing membranes, whether that's bitumen, whether it's single ply, whether it's liquids, and it can be adhered and or mechanically fixed. On this project in particular, this was a single ply that was used, and again, it was bonded in areas, mechanically fixed in others. So again, having the one product on site that could cater for both made it much simpler for the installing contractor. Why it delivers, again, it has its built-in acoustic performance, so it satisfied the requirements of BB93. Obviously, being non-combustible, it satisfies the requirements of BB100. And again, we adhered to the requirements of BS 6229 as the guidance, ensuring that there was no flat gutters. The minimum performance of any element of that roof, where it was a sump detail, for example, was at 105 mil, giving the 035. So we just made sure that everything was covered correctly. Then the Rockwell acoustic infills were used in the perforated deck areas. So using a stone wool trough infill, it's engineered with the right density to ensure the right performance is achieved when it's in situ. Obviously, the higher density of stone wool ensures the optimum acoustic performance, and while the tissue facing basically gives its aesthetic view from the underside. Although I've been to a number of sites, and when people tell me there's a white infill 8 feet up in the air, it's not the easiest to see through those very small perforations. And why it delivers, obviously it's very easy to install. It drops into the troughs and then the roof system is installed above. It's independently tested, and we know that it achieves the Class C absorption level that is required within BB93 for a sports hall area. So that's a run through of Cobham Free School. We have worked on a number of other facilities. I know 3 years ago I presented at this RIBAJ Journal opportunity, and I presented the NAS school out in Chigwell, which again had very onerous acoustic requirements. So again, it shows the option of using Rockwell can cover all bases that are required. If we've got time for any questions.
Thank you very much indeed, Justin.
No problem.
Perfectly timed as well. You're giving me an opportunity to try and claw back some minutes which I overran. So thank you very much.
That's okay.
I mean, for me, what was the nature of the contract that you used on this one? I mean, was it performance specified, or what was it, D&B?
So it started off as performance specified, and then it came over to D&B. And as I say, it was the opportunity that we had to present to the main contractor over a lunch and learn seminar, where it sort of opened their eyes to the things of BB93, BB100, and obviously providing them updated guidance with BS 6229.
Okay. And in terms of, I mean, you talk about the theoretical values that were obviously worked to when it was being specified. I mean, the school's opened now, hasn't it?
It has.
Yeah. Can you give us an idea about how one actually tries to find out about, I mean, is it just a case of wandering around the space and finding out about how the acoustics actually are working? Did you go in there and actually have kind of operational performance to try and work out how it's actually functioning?
So not on this one. I haven't been back there, and as far as I'm aware, I don't believe they have acoustically tested it since completion. But I know there are projects that we've been involved with in the past. You know, when it's a batch of schools that are being created, they'll normally pick, or the client, sorry, will normally pick one school out of that batch, and they will look to acoustically test it. So the acousticians involved will be invited back to site to then run an acoustic test.
But what have you been hearing from the client anyway? I mean, how has the experience been? Have you heard from the architects about how the experience?
Yep, the feedback that we've had is that the school is performing how it should. Under heavy rainfall, they're not getting any ingress of noise internally, including in the sports hall, where obviously that's got the perforated deck. So the roof system, along with the Rockwell infills, are performing the job they should be.
Okay, great. We have one question here from Isabella Luger or Luger. Apologies if I'm saying your name wrong, Isabella. She's asking, how sustainable is the product and what happens to it once it reaches end of life?
So the product is sustainable. It's basically manufactured from volcanic rock, which obviously the Earth reproduces many more times than we could ever use in our lifetime. And at the end of life, the product is recyclable, so it can come back to us. To go back into the mix to create new products to go out to other projects. One of the focuses that we've had for many years is to try and divert anything from going to landfill. So we offer that as a service to come back to us.
And give us a little bit more detail really about the, I mean, obviously the flammability of insulation materials is obviously top of everyone's mind at the moment. I mean, give us a bit more reassurance about the product itself in that regard.
So our products are predominantly A1, Euroclass A1 and Euroclass A2 S1 D0 tested, and obviously we've had a lot of involvement with many fire test houses over our 80 years of existence globally, and one of the things we always focus on is fire safety. So if we see a detail that we don't think is 100% correct, we will challenge it. We will give guidance on how that detail could be corrected to ensure that the right products are used in the right application. And you know, I know our fire engineering team, they spend more time in the fire test labs looking at products, applications, how to improve them, make them better, obviously ensuring that we're always providing the right and correct guidance to the industry.
Great. Well, thank you very much indeed, Justin. Nice talking to you.
Thank you.
I hope that the marble reception area looked absolutely, it looked wonderfully tacky, and I hope they've kept it. It's the kind of stuff that tends to go nowadays.
Yeah.
Thank you very much indeed for the chat.
No problem at all. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next presenter today is Satna Shah, who's associate at architect firm Shepheard, Epstein, Hunter. Sapna has experience of architecture and space planning in education and housing in private and public sectors. Recent work includes transformations of existing buildings, occupied and or listed, within demanding cost and time constraints, where sensitivity to diverse requirements of multiple stakeholders need to be combined with rigorous control of delivery during construction. Sapna also leads the BIM Implementation and Innovation Working Group within the practice, and has a special interest in interior design, particularly our experience of colour. Don't know if you'll be getting any mention of that in Sapna. In terms of the context, the firm prepared the 2002 University of Leicester development plan for all of the university sites. We're covering now the University of Leicester School of Business. Obviously, that's quite a big master plan. It includes Stirling and Gowan's 1963 engineering faculty, and a master plan for the OB campus in 2007. They've done a number of buildings for Leicester University, including the Percy G East Wing, Student Union, Council Chamber, and Space Park, which I don't know if you can know anything about. I did a bit of background on the School of Business, and the university actually opened its doors in 1921. So I'm assuming that this School of Management building is somewhat of a centenary building. I'm not quite sure. But yeah, it was founded as a university on the wish to respond to the devastation of the Great War. It had a major benefactor in the person of Thomas Fielding Johnson. The economics school, it started offering economics degrees in 1958. The business school started in 2016. And they're moving into Johnson's former home, apparently, which looks like a wonderful mock Tudor mansion. Tell us a bit more about that, please, Sapna. It's part of a £500 million estate regeneration. Off you go.
Hi, so my name is Satna. As you've already said, I'm going to talk about the project that Carlos has explained quite well for the University of Leicester. This is just a reminder of me and who I work for. We've been in university campus work since the 1960s. What I'm talking about is underpinned in the idea of a very complex project that required quite a lot of coordination and detailing, and collaboration was very key to this and really needs to be understood quite well. Behind all of this is the identity of the school, the business school. The business school, as Carlos has already said, was created in 2016 and was a Department of Economics and School of Management coming together. They saw themselves as global leaders, a global academy for leaders, innovators and change makers, and they required an autonomous school that rivaled others, a place the whole school could come together that really reflected their identity. A cohesive image was required with finishes that provided that clear identity of the school brand. The aim was for improved teaching, office and breakout spaces, for better learning, with an increased provision for executive education and corporate engagement. The site itself has quite a lot of gravitas and history, and it was felt that this could really support that strong identity as well. The site, I think you've already got a bit of background from Carlos. The main residence was dated about 1876 and was the house of Thomas Fielding Johnson. The university acquired it in 2013, and currently, and at the point we saw it, it was a disparate group of 1980s, 1890s and 1960s building, which has had incremental changes over the years following varying uses. It is in a conservation area, but isn't a statutory or locally listed building, but does have a positive contribution due to the quality of the main house Victorian architecture. But the historic buildings were in a state of disrepair and needed quite a lot of work to bring them up to current standards as far as possible, and also for the proposed new use. The proposals involved works to all of the buildings. So this is the teaching centre here, and this is the teaching centre here, and there was some remodelling done to the buildings, as well as a new hub right at the centre of that, which was a cafe and central breakout space, which required a lot more detailed work. You then have the historic buildings to the sides, which needed extensive refurbishment and selected remodelling, just to bring them back really to their former glory and make them suitable for a main building, a little bit more accessible actually than they are, with some additions of lifts and connections within that. The decision was to create a new extension to replace the old one that gave larger accessible teaching spaces at ground level and more breakout and office space for the school. Finally, works were actually done to the other ancillary buildings, and there was an additional reception actually formed to the rear of one of those buildings for access to the car park. So there's quite a lot of work over a few years. Yeah. The setting also required quite a lot of work, and we worked with BCA to do this, and the landscapes proposals really brought the buildings together. The proposal retains and enhances the green enclosed nature of the campus with significant landscaping across the site. You know, historic trees were maintained and a lot of significant new additional planting, plus a roof terrace were included. The courtyards even were upgraded so that they included Wi-Fi to allow people to work outside. And there was a new upgraded pond to the rear. The story of the old and new is really important here and is key to this design. There was a challenge of refurbishing an existing building, a historic building, coupled with bringing it up to a form suitable for its modern use and on modern regulations. It was important to retain those existing features as far as possible, a lovely features such as the original stained glass in all the areas, and bring them all back to their former glory as far as we could. Here you can see in the centre the state of the site before we started works, and in colour the finished products. At the top you can see the view from London Road, which had to be opened up so that the site had more presence from the road. There's some courtyards created between the new and the old spaces where people can move out and work and inhabit, and Wi-Fi enabled. There's a pavilion lecture theatre at the rear that was a feature in its own right, that had the roof terrace as well that you can see here. We also had to rebuild a chimney that was then repurposed to create ventilation for the lecture theatre. So this is a very complex project, so I'm not going to be able to go into a huge amount of stuff. So here I just wanted to talk a bit about the story of the materiality of the new build and the complexity that this required and the collaboration it really needed to achieve this. So copper cladding was wrapped around the facade and starts from bottom corner and wraps up and over. And to maintain that, that form, hidden gutters were created at the roof level just to ensure that aesthetic and clean line. The end gables, so just to go back a minute, this project is something we inherited from another architect at the end of stage 3. But we had to take it back to stage 2 to sort of reevaluate a little bit with the client's requirements and make sure it worked for them. And in doing that, we decided to stagger these 3 gable ends, as you can see here, which actually added a lot more complexity to the buildability of this project. So just to give you a hint of some of the buildability idea of it, if you're looking at copper, the support of it needs to be designed by the copper specialists, and their supports need to be carefully set out. But what also needs to be remembered is that the metal structure behind it needs to also, the metal stud structure behind needs to be coordinated so that it lines through with all these helping hands, and the contractor needs to be aware of this as well as ourselves to ensure that it all happens at the same time. I think these peaks were particularly challenging to achieve. The angle was very important for all the parts to come together and that every build as accurately as possible. So it starts with a steel frame, and there's a timber joist structure with a large amount of insulation, and then you have the copper element that comes up on top of that. And then at the end, these concrete precast units were fitted onto it. So if the angles didn't match, it got quite complicated and quite costly. The idea of the hidden gutters is a great idea, but very difficult to achieve. Just to try and support that, we're around with the timber structure, working out the routes of the drainage to ensure all these vaulted ceilings and these angles are kept, bringing in the roofing membrane people and the copper, and it all coming together in a correct watertight method, and the contractor actually understanding all of this, and it really needed that 3D element in design to achieve that. And I think the copper was also carried internally into the staircase between the old and the new. And it just needs to be remembered here that actually the support system internally is different in an internal wall, and that can be forgotten, and you do need to remember that and not just put in some gyp liner studs and hope that supports copper. You also have to be very careful about fittings. So a staircase handrail shouldn't really fix up to that copper, because any mistakes in that copper means that they have to unravel it from the top down to the bottom corner. You can't just take one panel out and replace it. So this copper really had to come in as far possible at the end of the build as it could, and we had to readjust the staircase to shift it away from it. People can touch it, and it is going to weather differently inside and outside, but I think it could be interesting, and you'll get that idea of history coming into it. But I think you have to make sure the client is really aware of what they're getting in the finish, because with this product it is hand done, and as you can see, it does have that hand bending and look to it, and you can see that process of installation, but it will weather and change as time goes by, and so I think it's very important the client is clear on what they're going to get, otherwise they may get a bit of a shock. The brick element was also very complicated, but created quite an interesting finish. It required a lot of work between Ibstock and Kahn and the steel supports and the contractor. So just going into that gable end facade, it looks like it's just one bit of brick and quite simple, but it was built up of a number of different parts. First, you have the base, which is more standard brick build as you would expect. Then we hit these projections, and we had to use a brick slip system, which was sit on these Nexus precast metal units, which were supported back to the structure with actually Ancon elements, but came through Ibstock. So there was that element of trying to get them to talk to each other. It was quite difficult. We also had to ensure that all the bonding continued up all the way through from the precast units, plus the bits that were actually built on site, and that was a challenge in its own right. The central area is just normal bricks, but they were supported off these Ancon MDC supports. But again, this wasn't that straightforward. You had to coordinate it with the steel structure behind and ensure the plates were welded to that steel in the correct joints, and the insulation followed through. But also there was a composite metal deck, and if at any point you had to support on that, you really had to hit the troughs and the deeper areas. And I think this would, if we'd known this earlier and really thought that through, you would thicken the edges to allow that support. So thinking about your structure is quite important, and the implications of that. These top units, so brick doesn't naturally, you can't naturally put brick together like this at high level. So it was considered that the precast unit would be the way to go here, with brick slips cast in and just support channels to the rear provided by Ancon again, cast in. These were then craned in and lifted into the steelwork. So that it was important that the steelwork was where it was expected, but some level of tolerance had to be built in. They were then fitted with angles onto that steel, and the copper had to wrap round. And it was pretty difficult, and any major level changes here had to be dealt with, and because you can't really just take away that precast unit and replace it. The pavilion to the rear, it was decided that an oval would be a better shape for the internal use by ourselves, so we changed it to an oval. But that really did build another level of complexity, because an oval to set out is not straightforward, as the setting out and angles change as you go around, and we had to deal with this and spend a lot of time doing that to ensure the brick was set out correctly, the curved lintels set out correctly, the curved windows, the brick, and how it ended at all the sections. And then on top, that there was a roof terrace on top with a curved balustrade, which also needed to be set out correctly, the stone parapet. So it made it quite complex. In addition, we did this dogtooth brick feature. And dogtooth brick, according to the contractors, it is a very specialist skill to lay it, and they said that there's only maybe 35 people in the whole country that can install this. Luckily, they managed to get someone really good to do that, but we had to work on the setting out and try and set it out for them and help them understand how the brick would sit as it hit the openings. And I think they just did a really great job of this. Considering how complex it is, there is quite a lot of elements in the wall, including drainage and steelwork that had to be coordinated with this. So just a little bit about interiors. As Carlos said, it is something that I'm interested in, and I came in and sort of worked with the client during the construction process, actually, to really work out their interior strategy, because this is where the brand identity really came through and how all the buildings really connected. And we tried to get them to focus and understand a little bit more about colour theory and really challenge the way that they used colour to as far as we really could. I mean, that was the only challenge. So strategy was agreed of colour palettes and material palettes for different spaces. This was just to show you a view of the interior of the existing house. And I know, Carlos, you wanted more about this, but I haven't. There's too much to talk about. So here's a snapshot view, and it was a challenge, the historic building, to refurbish and in its own right, and it's a whole talk in its own right. And this then shows you a view of the interiors, which I think came out really well. And the palette was sort of more neutral around the walls. So the school brand was dark blue and red, and like this burgundy red. But I think burgundy red was decided wouldn't really work on walls, and that was preferred to bring that through furniture. And the EECs, where you could take that sort of large colour and put it in. So the spaces were sort of kept quite neutral. The woodwork and everything was refurbished. And to create quite a corporate, clean look. The teaching hub, on the other hand, we worked with the G&T interiors, and it was quite a vibrant space with yellow that underpinned breakout. So we have these meeting pods in the background, hexagonal, and different kinds of furniture from booths, and sort of more exciting floor finishes. So it was just more vibrant. It was now, you could see a small picture in the round what it was before. So we broke out internal courtyard to extend the space out. And I think it gives you a good heart space between the teaching space and the historic building. Here's a view of some of the internal teaching spaces, including the oval lecture theatre and seminar spaces. So these required extensive work in acoustics and ventilation. And it was decided seminars could bring that blue floor colouring in, and we worked with the client to challenge them to put colour on the seating rather than just make them grey, and had to go through tons of different variations to get to this point. And they settled on blue and yellow accents. And we had to try and work with them to push them to sort of challenge their furniture ideas as far as we could. Timber was brought in and is an acoustic element in the build here, and it also sort of has some sort of reflection on the timber that's in the historic building. This gives you a view of the internal central space in the new build, which gives you some breakout space. So originally breakout was meant to be yellow, but then I think they sort of thought this may not work and was too much of a challenge and wanted something more neutral. So we put in these blue accents and create these carpets that helped with zoning a little bit. The timber on the ceiling also provides further acoustics, but also gives you kind of a nice warmth and interest in there. There's connections through the space with that central atrium, and also the roof light brings light in according to that, and there's offices to either side. So just some very key points at the end for some of the stuff I was talking about. I think it's clear that you understand the client's brand, but also push them and how those interiors and how they use that brand through the buildings, but also the implication of late consultation. And actually, I think some of this work should have been done before we got to site, and carrying it out through the project makes it more difficult. You really have to make it clear that collaboration is key, and that you understand the coordination requirements and sequencing, and that this is also made clear to the contractor and the client, and that enough time is left before you get to site to really detail these aspects. Really consider that specialist input needs to come in earlier, or you really have to think quite clearly about how you put it in a CDP, because this building was very complex, and we had to spend a lot of time on detailing nearly every single corner of this. Oh, well, I had to. Thank you, Carlos.
Thank you very much, Sapna. Yeah, intriguing project idea. It reminds me in terms of its kind of physical look, a little like Wolverhampton School of Architecture, which I went to visit about 3 months ago. And it kind of makes me, I mean, they actually worked with, I mean, they were working with a 18th century, well, actually early 19th century brewery building, which they converted to architecture. Oh, sorry. And they had kind of, I mean, you said here that this is not actually a listed building, but it's part of the conservation area. But they brought in a conservation architect to look specifically at the interfaces between the old and the new building. Did you have conservation architects working with you at this stage, or was it just a case of actually you having to do the whole thing yourself where you interfaced?
I think we took this on at stage 3, so a lot of it had already been designed to a certain point, and we had quite a short time to rework it to a certain aspect of it. So I'm not aware of that conservation aspect of it, but I can imagine that we did. But we've had some experience in the historic building, and the specification was adjusted to suit. But I think we've learned a lot from this process. I think a lot more care needs to be, and thought needs to be in understanding that historic building, and building in a lot of contingency, because it's quite difficult to pick everything up. Yeah,
I mean, this was the problem. I think from remembrance, it was a D&B project, and I don't think they wanted to go that route, but I think they just needed the surety. I think there was a massive investment on their part. They were bringing a completely derelict building back to life. Probably not the situation here, but how was this procured? I've got a question here from Dennis Hellier, who was asking what the procurement method was for the project.
So this was a traditional project. And it was a traditional contract. We were architects and contract administrators, but there was elements of contractor design portion in here. So for the copper, the helping hand brackets, and the steel finishing the structure. As I said, it does require that subcontractor and specialist input that's required. And what I think the lesson learned is to really make sure the client really thinks about the time that you need before that. They always rush us into going to tender and not quite understanding the complexity of this. And I think as architects, we possibly need to make it much more clearer that these kind of things do need more time. And because it was more complicated than it looks, maybe.
Yeah, I mean, that's what I think is part of the issue, is just how much you have to kind of build in terms of a contingency to dealing with problems that probably are only revealing themselves once you're actually on site.
Yeah, and the thing I haven't talked about is services to this building. That was a whole story in its own right and was very complicated. We had to get ventilation in the old building through across to the new, and it was complicated.
Isabella Luja, or Luga, I still don't quite know whether you're saying it, I'm saying it right. She did ask, it was the contractor chosen based on their understanding of construction methods. So I'm assuming about, as you say, you got specialist contractors in. Was that kind of a contractor design? No, I mean, that was D&B.
Well, yeah, so it was traditional, so all the information was there. They have time to question, but there is a way that the contractors work in this country, and unfortunately it isn't always overly collaborative when money and information get in the way. But I think they've done a huge job here, and they really, really wanted to do a good finish on this project, went maybe above and beyond some of the scope that they did have to do that. I think they were able to understand as much as they could. I think my point is that we should be more careful to really understand it ourselves when we're designing, and the buildability and coordination required to make sure it's even clearer to them. I've just learned that from a number of different projects. So for understanding that procurement needs to start early, and that contractors sometimes delay this to their detriment or don't have the right people at the start to create that process, and it just delayed things and made it even more complicated on this project.
Yeah.
We were trying to avoid that.
And what about the issue of the materiality of the copper itself? I mean, a great material. How are you planning on this weathering? Was the client actually aware that, I mean, is there going to be a certain level of greening to this, or has it been treated in such a way as it retains the qualities of, you know, the kind of the burnished look?
No, I think the idea was that it would weather and change, and they were clear on that. But I think it's just that at the start, you always get this really shiny product and you have to kind of remind people that it's going to change. But the thing we hadn't quite expected was to see those marks in the middle on the triangles, which they've done some sort of folding process that they were doing. And it just struck you quite obviously when you first see the building. So you just have to remind people, actually, it's going to be changing and it's a natural product. It's going to, you know, work with whatever happens to it and vary as you look at it.
We have a question here from Deepa, who says, interesting one, copper is used in electrical circuits. I'd like to know how you prevent copper cladding from going live during electrical storms. Do you use earth rods anywhere? And if so, where are they placed?
So there is a lightning pole system on this building, because lightning is an issue and that has to be dealt with. But you have to earth this copper back down to the structure. And it's the same with the steel frame. Everything is connected and earthed back down to the structures through, I can't remember how it's done here, but through the steel frame, but it was discussed. And yeah, you have to make sure it's all earthed. So if anything does hit it, it comes down. But ultimately, the first step is the lightning protection system and the lightning rod mast that they have on this building. I think it was quite complicated to get the lightning aspect of this agreed, and that there is a pole somewhere that does that.
Okay, and a question from Richard, who is asking, was embodied carbon calculated as part of the project?
No, not on this project. This was a while back, I guess, and I don't think embodied carbon was something that was just, you know, thought about on this project, really. No, unfortunately. I mean, moving forward, yeah, that is kind of at the centre of our design on some of the projects we're doing now and looking into that. But this project, it wasn't something that was being looked at.
Okay, and from Dennis again, he was saying, how useful or important was BIM in the detailed design?
So BIM, I think it is really important, and it would, because a lot of this had to be done in 3D, you couldn't really see it in 2D, and it required all the different subcontractors' models to be put into our model so we could review them. So with the steel frame, as far as possible, everything from subcontractors was done in 3D, and then we had to overlay and look at it in 3D. It was just impossible to understand it in one dimension. But, you know, things like managing services and electrics and stuff, I think if that hadn't quite done in 3D on this project in BIM, and I think that would have helped quite a lot, because I could clearly see that there was going to be coordination issues, but it was trying to instill that in everybody and everybody updating their BIM model, and that's where the challenge comes in. So it wasn't a full BIM level 2 project, but we started using it on this project, and I think it was quite useful.
Okay. Isabella here is asking about the post-occupancy thermal and acoustic performance. Have you done any studies on that?
Not yet. I think this finished in the middle of lockdown, so I don't know how well it's actually been used, and we haven't really had a chance to go back in, but I think it's something that should be done, and we'd be quite interested to look at that. In thermal and acoustics, there's always going to be an aspect in the historic building that we can't really improve as much in terms of thermal and acoustics. You can only do so much, but we did replace all the windows and everything in that existing building as well, actually. That was a feat.
And a final question again, actually about the contract, or at least about the kind of basically saying from Nicholas Alderson, do you know the reason for the client employing a design team for stages 1 to 3 and then appointing another team to deal stages 3 to 4? Were they advised by a PM company who considered this as the best approach? It seems that this causes many problems from concerns over the original brief of the design, detailed design, and the introduction of interior design so late in the process.
Without wanting to get into that story too deeply, I think the client just wanted, they wanted an architect who maybe they felt could better understand what they needed potentially and could deal with this project, and so that change happened. I don't really feel I can go into that in too much detail, but it wasn't something that was a decision necessarily as part of the process. I think it was a decision that they made for their best interest potentially. But the issue here was that the turnaround has to be done quite quickly. This is the second building I've had to do like this, but you have to take it back a level and do everything quite quickly and redesign it. And it's due to that speed that the interiors may have been dealt with through consultation during the process, but also it was my passion to maybe make sure that story was thought about more clearly, and I added this possibly a greater way of looking at it and dealing with it, which gave us a lot more work, but it was because I felt it was important.
Well, I think just as a comment, I think it's quite interesting that the you're projecting steels over on those gables. Interesting. Bill Phillips did exactly the same thing on a housing scheme they did down in near London Bridge, and they actually got an awful lot of flack on Twitter for the idea that they dare to use brick slips to kind of cut the steel beams. It's quite nice, right? But it's amazing how much details like form follows function details get picked up by people walking past.
It's an odd way to use brick because it's not naturally used like that, and I don't know if I would necessarily think that you should be doing that. I mean, we've done it and it looks good, but there is a thought that should you really be using it if it's not naturally meant to do that. I think there's a good discussion about that.
Well, thank you very much indeed, Satna. That was a very interesting discussion. Thank you very much for drawing attention to both the kind of the wonderful things about it and the problems that you experienced on the way. Very revealing. We are going to take a short break now, so I'm sorry we're running about 20 minutes late. Apologies about that. But if we reconvene at 10:30, that would be great. Thank you very much indeed, Satna, again for your presentation, and we'll hopefully see you all again at 10:30. Welcome back. We are now in the second half of our seminar on education buildings. Had an interesting presentation from Sapna and post-presentation chat. We are now coming on to our second sponsor presentation. This is coming from Jonathan Lowy, Operational Marketing Manager at VMZINC. Jonathan has over 23 years of experience working with VMZINC. He's operated in both technical and sales positions in 3 different countries and has an excellent understanding of the market and the technical possibilities of zinc as a roofing and cladding material. He's also been involved in technical certification, environmental profiles and BBAs. He also helped write technical literature aimed both at architects and installers. Before joining VMZINC, Jonathan worked as a land surveyor in Paris, ironically spending quite a lot of time, he says, on the zinc rooftops of Paris. VMZINC's latest coup is to be supporting the skill of zinc metalworking on Houseman's Paris and the giving it a World Heritage status. He's talking about no less important issues of the specification on the educational building typology that's furnishing children with skills for life. So speaking on the broad issue of education for all toddlers to adults by VMZINC, your 15 minutes, Jonathan, starts now.
Thank you very much, Carlos. I'll start off by sharing my screen. There we go. Just get it on the presenting mode. Right, hopefully everybody can see that. So thank you very much, Carlos. Yeah, education for all toddlers to adults. I think one thing that Carlos mentioned at the beginning, that our educational spaces need to be attractive. And I do remember actually speaking to a parent many years ago, and the person said, why would you use such a nice material such as zinc on a school? Which sort of maybe explains some of the problems. Some people don't consider educational spaces as important and need to be attractive, but lots do. And this is an example of Charterhouse School, just south of London. Most of the campus is sort of Victorian neo-Gothic, and Design Engine built this new science block, sort of reflecting a little bit the neo-Gothic architecture, and used pigmento brown standing seam, zinc roof and cladding quite effectively. But moving to sort of the younger age group, and without getting sort of too political, but it's quite tricky to find kindergarten schools in the UK that have been sort of recently built and developed in any sort of interesting or exciting way. So here are a couple of examples in France. On the left, both projects in the Paris region. On the left is a kindergarten using zinc on low slope roofs in quite a complex geometry, and on the right using it as a rain screen. And you can see different finishes have been used. Zinc is traditionally grey, but over the last few years we've created a number of different finishes, giving a slight colour to the zinc. You can still see the texture of the zinc, but it does have a slight colour. And on the right you can see green, blue, red, and then the more traditional grey and dark grey. Keeping in the kindergarten theme, and again France, this is a project where zinc's been combined, this time in a more traditional standing seam roof, but with timber, which is fairly common. Timber and zinc work extremely well together. You have to be a little bit careful sometimes using hardwoods above zinc. Using timber below zinc is never a problem, and there's never any sort of staining. And on the inside you can actually see the architects have brought the timber inside to clad the vaulted ceilings, which is very attractive. Moving up in the age range, this is a secondary school, still in France, and here zinc rain screens being used to clad the facade, but perforated zinc has been used, which has allowed some lettering to be included on the facade. Obviously, the advantage about zinc is that when you perforate it, you're just exposing more zinc. There's no coating that's been punctured or exposed, so the corrosion problems are not there. Moving back to the UK though, this is a PLP job in the old Building Schools for the Future programme, Pimlico Academy, which had a sort of a performing arts orientation, and this is the performing arts building, which uses quite interesting geometry and is all clad with the standing seam quartz zinc. Very different type of school. This is Winchester School, which goes back to the 14th century. This building is actually called the New Hall, which was built in about 1960, maybe not quite as well as some of the older buildings on the campus. And it was renovated about sort of 6 or 7 years ago now, again using the quartz zinc. But here the architects have used zinc as fascia materials, soffit materials, and as indeed as rainwater materials, with the gutters all made out of the same material. And a very different type of school in London, in Newham, Sandringham Primary School by Walters and Cohen Architects. This new part of an existing school was built a few years ago, and you can see they've respected the roofs architect, or the roofscape, the height of the buildings with the existing turn of the century residents, which is fits in quite well. What's important with all materials, but certainly zinc, are the build-ups. Zinc roofs can be cold roofs, as you can see on the top left, but you can also use warm roof construction where there's no ventilated cavity, as you can see on the top right and the bottom. All of these have certification for fire penetration, or no fire penetration and no fire spread, following the B Roof T4 certification. Moving into the universities now, this is a BDP project actually going back to about 2009. This is York University, the Computer Science Building, and BDP used the pigmento range with the coloured zinc on this rain screen quite effectively. So this has been up about 12 years now. It's one of the earlier uses of pigmento in the UK. Another university, this time at Girton College in Cambridge, Eliza Morrison's built a new residential block, actually also following a Victorian neo-Gothic campus. And as you can see, PV solar panels have been fixed to the standing seam zinc roof, which is fairly straightforward and being used more and more. A slightly different type of system, flat lock panels. Here on the left, Stourbridge College, using diamond shingles, flat lock panels, and on the right, rectangular panels with a slightly offset joint, giving quite an interesting texture, and also using pigmento blue, which again gives a slightly different aspect. And here are two college projects, very different scales. On the left is a sort of a test building at Dundee University, which actually analyzes how buildings are actually performing as far as energy use, and that was built a number of years ago. And on the right, another renovation, this time at Parsons Tower at Newcastle College. And here a 1960s block has been clad in a number of materials, but including the anthrazinc standing seam roof to wall. And in the middle, you can see the quartz zinc vertical panels. It should be noted that zinc roofing is not a flat roof material. It can only go down to 3 degrees. So it does need to have a slight slope. As with the roofs, the wall build-up is also critical. Traditionally, zinc is often installed over the timber substrate, and that's absolutely fine. But obviously, for a number of buildings, that's not possible, and you need to use A1 or A2 limited combustibility substrates. And in these examples, you can actually see galvanized steel deck used as a substrate to enable it to be compliant. This is also a flat lock panel, one of the earliest using engraved zinc called Azingar. This is the Maxwell Centre, which is part of the Cavendish Laboratories in Cambridge. And here BDP used the Azingar material. It's quite a bright finish, but actually very matte, which is sort of one goes against the other, but it does give quite an interesting finish. And another renovation, this time in Stirling. Historic Scotland took over this 19th century engine shed, which is in the middle, and added some new sheds. And this is a centre of education for historic built environment in Scotland. And again, using the same anthracite, so this is the dark finish on the right, University of East Anglia, and on the left, it's Ely Boathouse, which you might have noticed if you saw the recent boat race. This is where the two crews started. I thought it was a little bit unfair on Oxford having to start at the the Cambridge University Boathouse, but obviously that was the situation this year. And a bit further afield, this time at Monash University in Australia. Here, John Wardle Architects have used a sort of almost a curtain screen in front of the facade, and this curtain's been made out of perforated quartz zinc again, using giving it quite a sort of a real sort of strong texture on the facade of this building. Now, we've heard a few times about sustainability and performance. Now, zinc is, it's obviously very attractive, but it does last a very long time. There are a number of actual projects that are over 100 years old, and there's the environmental product declaration that indicates this as well. The other advantage about zinc is it's completely recyclable, and indeed about 99% of zinc is actually recycled. Zinc is very, very rarely goes into landfill. It does have an economic value, so it is nearly always recycled. And we do need to talk about our own education. There's undoubtedly in all sorts of sectors skill shortages, and over the last 30 years VMZINC has actually been involved in official training. So we do get involved in training installers. We're not a training school as such, but we take competent installers and give them information about how our materials should be used, soldering, expansion and contraction and so on. And Carlos also mentioned about the rooftops of Paris and the installers that fit them being put forward for UNESCO World Heritage status. And I believe that we should know whether that's been successful in the next few days. So that's been a very, very brief run through zinc. There's lots more information, but I want to leave a minute or two for any questions. So I'll hand back to Carlos.
Thank you very much indeed, Jonathan. Every time you say the word Asengard, I just can't help thinking of Lord of the Rings. I just don't know why. You get the names, how you get the names for these things.
It is actually, it is Persian. Zangar is Persian for zinc. So that's
really?
That's how that comes along. There is a historical connection, maybe not to Lord of the Rings or Harry Potter, but to Persia.
You learn something every day. It does sound suitably mythical, I'll give you that. Yeah, intriguing that. I mean, I suppose what I kind of come away with is, do you think actually, I mean, it strikes me that there's very much a kind of a UK approach to how we use zinc, and a kind of a continental one. It strikes me that, I mean, whether they, just because they did Haussmann's Paris, zinc is just such a natural material for them. I don't know why, but it seems to me that there's a lot more experimentation going on in places like France, and certainly that one in Australia, which looks amazing, rather than in the UK, where it seems to be dealt with far more in terms of its materiality and colour, and kind of absorbing it into existing conservation buildings, you know, university colleges, Winchester. I don't know, it just seems to be that we're a lot more kind of shy about using the material and not investigating its potential, as opposed to France, which seems to be going kind of like, you know, multifaceted, interesting usage, using it as a rain screen. I don't know, do you kind of get that as a sense generally, that we're rather more conservative in our uses?
I'm not entirely sure. The history of zinc is, zinc's been used all across Europe and even beyond since the 19th century. The difference with the UK is that it really died a death in the second half of the 20th century, and zinc was pretty much not being installed in the 80s at all. I mean, it was zero. And then it was sort of brought up again through European manufacturers bringing it to architects. In France, it is a more commonly used material, and it does have the actual living history of Haussmann's Paris. which we don't obviously have here in the UK. We do have a few historic buildings with zinc, but not to that level. But there are some quite interesting uses of zinc in the UK. I would probably say that that most architects in the UK would consider zinc as a more contemporary material, whereas most architects, certainly in France and probably Germany, would think of it more as we think of as lead. So, the same material, but definitely looked at slightly differently in different countries.
We have a question from Colin. He's saying, hello, you did actually touch on this in your presentation. Is zinc recycled, and to what percentage and specification is available?
Well, zinc is, we believe it's now just over 99% of zinc used for roofing and cladding in Western Europe is recycled. I mean, mainly because it has an economic value. So people won't throw it away and put it in landfill because they can get some money for it. Now, not all old roofs become new roofs. So it might be used for galvanizing, it might be used for brass production, it might be used for roofs. At the moment, we use just over 20% recycled content in our zinc. But it's actually easier, slightly ironically, to use recycled zinc to make zinc oxide for hand cream than it is to make a zinc sheet. So you need higher quality of zinc for your roofs than you do for your skin. But that's sort of, but it is 99% recycled.
And is zinc oxide a basic constituent of face creams? I'm no expert. Right.
Yes, the zinc is, I mean, when they say pink zinc, for, putting zinc on your sunblock, there's zinc oxide. There's a lot of zinc oxide that's used in makeup, in all sorts of products, including skin cream. It's a required element. Zinc is not toxic. It is possible to get zinc deficiencies. I think you really need to sort of have a very, very strange diet, but it is possible to have a zinc deficiency. So it's a very commonly used material.
Oh, interesting. I mean, I'm just kind of like minded of it. Back in Houseman's day, they were probably slathering mercury oxide all over. So,
well, the slightly difference in Houseman's that when zinc was pre-1970, zinc was not produced through electrolysis, which meant that it was less pure, which meant it had a few impurities such as cadmium, arsenic, lead in it. So the majority was, which was not so nice. Now that's stopped in the last 50 years now. But I mean, they're very small percentages, but they did exist. And that's actually one of the reasons why sometimes the rooftops of Paris have a slightly lighter aspect, because there's a very slight amount of cadmium in them, which gives a slightly different patina.
Well, actually, speaking of that, we've got another question from Colin saying, what coatings are applied to zinc cladding? What weathering or pattern accrues with decades?
Sorry, what? I didn't get the very last bit.
What kind of weathering pattern accrues with the decades?
Right. Well, zinc is, I mean, the Sapna previously mentioned copper quite a lot, and ultimately copper, it will take a long time, it will go green. Zinc will go grey, that's its natural colour. So if you take any zinc that we manufacture, as long as it's been installed and designed correctly, in 100 years, it still should be there, and it will be grey. It will be a middle grey. Now, we produce pre-patinated quartz zinc, which imitates that, and that will really change very little. The pigmento range, which has a slight colour added to the pre-weathering, is probably going to go back to the middle grey. Now, it's going to take decades. It's not going to happen. I mean, we haven't seen any change in the UK projects since we first installed them, sort of 16 or 17 years ago. But 50 or 60 years' time, the final colour of zinc is going to be a middle grey. But we're talking sort of, decades down the line.
We've got another question here from Dennis Hellier. This is actually, sorry, technical challenge on your substrates here.
Yeah.
Is cold roof wall or warm roof preferable, and for what reason? And from Nigel Shapland, what are the benefits or risks with a ventilated or non-ventilated flat roof design?
Well, just one thing on flat roof, that's not possible for zinc. It only needs a 3-degree slope, but it does need a slight fall. We quite often get asked about, should you do a cold roof or warm roof? It really depends on the building design. Both are possible. The advantage of a warm roof is that you have better air tightness, you have fewer cold bridges, but there are buildings that a cold roof is the way to go through the design of the building, or maybe it's a renovation, it's more applicable. So there's no, I wouldn't say one is better than the other, with the possible exception of the thermal. It's easier to get a high thermal value with a warm roof. As far as walls, generally organizations like NHBC like to see ventilated walls. You can do a non-ventilated wall, but it's important to make sure building control or any organizations such as that are gonna support it. It can be designed, and we're happy to warranty the zinc if it's done like that. The important thing is, and it's sort of obvious, but I suppose it always has to be said, is that both work as long as they're done properly.
Well, thank you very much indeed, Jonathan. I'm sorry, I do need to move on because I'm being absolutely terrible with my timing here. Thank you very much indeed. That was great. I'm looking at seeing some multifaceted dodecahedron schools turning up in the UK, this side of the channel at some point. In the meantime, we must move on to Tom Sermon, co-founder of Sermon Weston. It's a London architecture studio established in 2014 by Tom Sermon and Percy Weston. The practice has a body of work that's contextually sensitive, considers materials, techniques, use and function, with built works to date including a new build house, Ditton Hill House, which we covered in RIBAJ recently, a couple of months ago, garden annexes including the Lantern Studio, Cork Study, Mayo Road, Replica House, and Makepeace Mansions, which I believe we covered in PiP, July, August last year. In the education sector, Sermon Weston created Brunswick Park Cookery Cottage for primary school there, cafe at the RCA where they both studied. And today, Tom was talking about the Hackney School of Food on the Mandeville Primary School site in Hackney. This actually won the RIBA Journal's McEwen Award with the retrofit of a redundant school caretaker's house. It's actually now a school of food for children all over the borough. And not only is it a wonderful uplifting intervention, but it deals in a very real way with the issues of child food poverty, bringing food education to children and their parents in a deprived inner city borough, all done on a very tight budget. I believe it was just 300K, which includes a new garden space, which Tom's just told me is coming up beautifully right now. And it allows kids to grow their own food. So the project's big coup is its first floor removed to transform this former caretaker's cottage into something quite unexpected and joyous. Tom, take it away.
Thanks very much. Thank you for that intro. Yeah, so as you've mentioned, we set up Sermon Weston in 2014, and today we're a team of 4 based in Bermondsey in South London. So just a bit of background to set the scene before I get onto the School of Food. This is, as you've mentioned, this is the very first project we ever realised, a cafe for the Royal College of Art. This was designed and built with our good friend Joseph Dean immediately after we graduated. And we set out to create a warm and playful timber box in what was otherwise a fairly stark and cold sculpture building. And if I was to sum up our approach to this project, I would say reclaimed scaffolding boards and a lot of TLC. We had a really limited budget on the project, so we selected this essentially free resource as the primary construction material. We then cut, planed, sanded, routed, jointed, and finished the boards in kind of almost every way we could imagine, to try and elevate them to a level where they were almost no longer recognizable as the original scaffolding boards. And we didn't know this at the time, but this approach of working in expensive materials to try and eke out their value, and a kind of playful experimental were threads that would go on to inform our practice. And so following the completion of the cafe, we launched our studio and we went on to design and build our first 6 projects. So that brings me on to the School of Food. But before I really talk you through the project, I'd like to play a brief video which hopefully captures the spirit of that project. So if we could play the video, that would be great.
Morning, Chef.
Hi, I'm Litka, head gardener, and this is Tom, a chef and food educator. We both work at the Hackney School of Food, which has some incredible gardens and some very special helpers. Our gardens are in the grounds of Mandeville Primary School, a state school in Hackney, which is a part of the LIP Federation, so children from 3 schools can come and help us to tend the produce.
Inside the building, the architects have transformed this space, which is an old caretaker's cottage, into a wonderful teaching kitchen, where we bring the produce that we've harvested from the gardens outside, and we transform that into really tasty meals using lots of different cooking techniques. We are offering classes to schools across Hackney and London, and we are also working with the charity Chefs in Schools to bring local communities in to this wonderful food education hub.
Who lives there?
Bees.
There are bees.
Beehive there.
Yes. We have our own beehives, so children can learn about nature. And we can't wait to get our own honey from Hackney.
This is where cooking and growing begin to combine. In this area of the garden, our architects Sermon Weston have designed the beds to be staggered in height so that all ages can use them. And as we go up the steps in the back, we've got this beautiful wood-fired oven overlooking the whole garden in the background. If anyone is interested in what we've been doing here, the plans are available, and we'd really love to see the Hackney School of Food replicated all over the country and seeing more kids getting stuck into this sort of thing.
Goodbye to the Hackney School of Food!
So as you can see on the screen here, the project is a joint venture between wonderful charity Chefs in Schools, whose mission is to transform food, food culture and food education in primary schools, and the LEAP Federation of Schools. And the LEAP Federation is a group of 3 state schools within the London Borough of Hackney. And between them, the ambitious brief was to realise a food education hub for London school children and the community that are, immediately surrounds the site. So here you can see the site in context. Where my cursor is here, if you can see my cursor, or if not, the orange box is the site. The pink line represents the wider school site, and the area highlighted with the blue border, an area of underused school playground. This is the site as we found it, a redundant caretaker's house. As you can see, rather let go and in a pretty poor state. And here you can see that the inside, again, not particularly well-loved building. And so our task was to overhaul this building and the surrounding gardens to deliver the food education hub that the clients were after. Here, the site plan as we found it, with our site highlighted in orange. In the centre of the plan, you can see the house. To the left, a small courtyard, and then to the left again, a former garage block with the neglected gardens wrapping around. And just to orientate you, the garage block lies to the north of the site, and the gardens where you can see the trees and the planting to the south. So a bit of a jump here, but this is how the project ended up, the resultant site plan after our interventions. So the educational kitchen sits in the center here. To the right, we've created a walled kitchen garden, and that's to the south side. To the left, an entrance courtyard, and the former garage block is repurposed as food storage with the provision of toilets. So I want to just quickly try and summarize our design approach for the project. It was really critical to the clients that the children learned in a very hands-on way. A key part of Chefs in Schools mission statement is learning through doing. So we wanted to take that idea and expose it to and apply it to the way we treated the buildings and the gardens. So we set out to expose the construction ingredients of the buildings and the gardens, so that the kids and adults that were engaging with these spaces could understand how this environment was physically put together, or even if they couldn't understand it, they could at least question it. And the second kind of key thread to our design approach, and this is something that hopefully we'd learn with our very hands-on approach to our early projects, was that we wanted to really target the spending where we could have the most educational impact. So we identified the areas that we felt it was key to really spend the design and construction time and money. And then elsewhere where work was required, but it was less educationally critical, we took a more loose fit approach, just kind of working as enablers and not being too precious about how things were done, but hopefully with our kind of experience in construction, still realizing those elements in a kind of joyous and beautiful way. So I'm going to start out on the street and then walk you through the gardens and then into the educational kitchen to try and explain that approach in various moments of the project. So here you can see the street facing elevation, and this was enlivened by this wonderful mural by artist Jean Julien. In the center of the oven there, you can see a new picture window, and within that, the signage kind of announcing the new asset for the community. This window was the only area on the project where we made a new structural opening, so the only kind of new lintel that was required. And then in this image, you can see the entrance to the courtyard, which is where the children and visitors primarily enter. And then a little bit further down the street, you can see how we created a new opening into the kitchen garden. It was really important to us that members of the local community could see into the space and begin to engage with it and appreciate it as a new kind of valuable asset within their community. And so here, this photo is taken as if you've just walked through that gate into the kitchen gardens. And of all the images of the project, I think this is my favorite image. I absolutely love this photo because it really captures how we hoped that the kids would engage with the space. The planters kind of rake up from the street towards the back, and they double as places for children to perch, to play. And while doing that, they're surrounded by this produce that they've grown themselves from seed. So we were really delighted with how this particular element of the project worked out. In this image, you can see an aerial view of the gardens, and I talked about this idea of targeted spending to maximize educational impact. And here in the gardens, that is really within this masonry carpet you can see. So there's the masonry paving itself, there's the rake planters, and then the pizza oven and the fire pit. This was where the real kind of design time and construction money went. Around that, there's self-compacting gravel and perimeter planting to kind of soften the hard edges of the garden. This is an image taken during the construction, and as I mentioned previously, apart from that picture window on the street-facing elevation, elsewhere we had existing openings that we either adjusted or infilled. So as you can see here, an infilled door, an adjusted window opening. And elsewhere we lengthened windows to turn them into doors, and the idea there being that within our extremely limited budget, trying to kind of minimize structural changes where we didn't need to make them. And I think I quite this image also captures the contrasting brickwork. So for the kitchen garden, for the planters and the masonry paving, we selected a brick with a lot more textural and colour variation than the existing kind of hard-edged brick of the house. And then we did that because we wanted those elements to have a warmer, almost cottagey garden feel. There's lots of great historic precedents for the walled garden. And then that same brick is used to wrap up the building and kind of stitch the old with the new. And the fact that it's not tied in, that it's a different brick, it emphasizes our interventions as kind of a deliberately announcing that this is where we've made a change. And so on the south facing elevation, another kind of loose fit design addition was the addition of this very simple cafe style awning, providing solar shading to the windows on that south elevation. And as you can see in this image, that awning kind of creates this outdoor dining and teaching space, which on a day like today, Tom, the chef who you can see there, will be out there kind of teaching the kids, and that's where they'll kind of sit and enjoy the meals that they've cooked. Another kind of, I suppose, loose fit element and sort of agricultural appropriation here, this kind of oversized water butt. So we're collecting the rainwater off the roof here, and as you can see in the image on the left, everything is kind of deliberately on show and exposed, and Tom can tell them that, you know, we're collecting the water from the roof, and they then take that water and go off and water the plants around the garden. And here there's just a few photos of the gardens in use and how the lessons work. Kind of they're very keen on getting the children as up close and personal with all the produce, harvesting it, tasting it, and then eventually going on to cook it. So now I'm going to take you inside the building, and hopefully here, this kind of balance we're trying to strike with the loose fit design and then the more carefully designed elements becomes a bit more clear. This is the short section of the building, and what I'd like to highlight in this is that, as has already been mentioned, the primary architectural move was to completely strip out the existing first floor to create this bright and voluminous teaching space. So there's a steel ring beam which is inserted all round to provide a bit of additional strengthening where that floor was taken out. And then elsewhere in this image, you can see that where openings are adjusted, you can see the unprecious kind of approach to the blockwork infill. It's left exposed. We also stripped off the existing plasterboard ceiling, exposing the roof trusses. And the next thing that's very important here is that we established this kind of functional datum. So the top of the splashback forms that datum. And if I go on to the long section here, you can see that datum wraps around the whole of the teaching space. So below that datum was where we would really design hard, rigorously, carefully maximize the educational impact we could make. And above the datum, everything's a bit more loose fit and exposed. We didn't worry about removing existing wall finishes or trying to cover anything up. Those were all areas where we tried to limit the spending, but do so in a way that hopefully is still joyous and kind of textural and beautiful. So one of the, as I mentioned, one of the kind of moves that key moves that we made was the removal of the existing plasterboard ceilings to expose the roof trusses, and you can see that in this image, and you can also see the industrial radiant heater, and these kind of heaters are usually reserved for warehouses or the like, but we work with our M&E engineers to find an economical solution to the required heating demand. And we also quite like the fact that when it's on, it glows kind of bright orange like the grill element of an oven, which was kind of an unexpected kind of appropriate win. And then so having stripped off the plasterboard and kind of removed the loose Rockwell insulation that was there. We then had the challenge of how to re-insulate the roof. So here in this image, you can see how we kind of tackled that. After a lot of research, we selected a spray-in isonine foam insulation. This was great for a number of reasons. It was extremely economical. It fully filled around the kind of filigree existing roof trusses to give us a kind of good insulative seal all round. It also worked sort of surprisingly well. An unexpected benefit, that textural surface worked well acoustically. And then rather than trying to cover it up, we just simply sprayed it in as we had painted the walls and roof trusses. And we really rather love the kind of bizarre, almost lunar-like texture of it. And we know that not everyone does, but I think the important thing is that we weren't precious. It was a kind of a neat solution to the problem, and it wasn't somewhere that was going to add tremendous educational value for the children. And so I think this kind of image nicely captures that loose fit approach to certain areas of the project.
Tom, just to draw your attention to the time slightly, but also there's a question directly to do with it from Colin, who was asking how you handled the brick cavity wall house and how you improved the insulation regarding the cavity. How did you work with that?
Can I just I'm almost done. Can I just come to the questions at the end?
No, carry on, sorry.
Yeah. So again, this picture, again, taken during the construction. This is a photo that I think nicely captures the kind of cragginess and loose fit above the datum and more order below. You can see traces of existing walls, the galvanized conduit, and the kind of craggy approach to making good the windows after the new windows were inserted. And I think this image is an image that best captures that across the project as a whole. Below the datum is we worked hard to make the space as functional as possible. It had to accommodate 30 children, so we designed these bespoke kind of height adjustable cooking and washing stations from scratch. They feature flush mounted induction hobs, so the children can freely slide pots and pans across without catching a lip and boiling water spilling out over them. And we tried to strike this careful balance between them being robust enough sort of for a professional kitchen environment with also some warmth. So the kind of birch plywood joinery below adds that warmth. Above you can see a much more kind of I guess texturally varied environment, the exposed steel beam that I've spoken about, and the roof insulation wrapping around the trusses. And then here, just to very quickly flick through a few images of the space in use. So here's Tom kind of conducting a lesson with all the kids crowded around the central island. A few more images here of lessons underway, and we really enjoyed going back and seeing the space being used. And again, it's just great to see how much the kids seem to be enjoying the kind of hands-on learning experience and hopefully enjoying the building. So finally, just flicking through a few details here that I hope kind of capture the spirit of our design approach and also the project as a whole. Here's a blocked up opening, and here kind of the different bricks where we've made adjustments outside and kind of very simple lintel details. And so just to finally finish off, we're really chuffed that the school and Shepheard schools seem to really love the project. And we're now working with them, developing a master plan for the wider site, kind of encompassing an area of unused playground or underused playground. So this will be realised over the coming years, and the kind of second phase will feature a propagation house, natural play spaces, and as funding becomes available, these will be kind of gradually realised, and the School of Food will expand to encompass more of the existing school site. So thank you very much. Hopefully I wasn't too bad on time.
Don't worry, it's such a lovely project anyway that it's a joy to see it. absolutely fantastic in terms of consideration of the brief and of the, sorry, hello. Yes, absolutely wonderful consideration of the brief and the users. What I think was really nice as well is how kind of playful it all is. I mean, you've got this kind of wonderful, you know, it's almost like architecture as advertisement. You can always go straight back to kind of learning from Las Vegas, or, you know, when you're looking at that window, which is kind of a complete play on the idea of advertising a building as well as being part of the architecture. And also that sense that it's not kind of, that everything is expressed. The drainage of the building, the insulation, which, you know, I think just looks like clouds. It's just like looking up into the sky. So I think there's just something really beautiful and playful about thinking about how children think, and how the building is ultimately an expression of the processes of how a building works, and making that evident to children that are using it, and also in the idea of play within that material specification. So well done on that, absolutely beautiful project. Colin was asking the question about how you actually dealt with the cavity wall insulation of the building. What did you do in terms of upgrading the existing walls?
So the existing walls they are insulated. We didn't do any thermal improvements to those existing walls. We had quite a good relationship with building control on the project, and key to the functioning of the space is extremely tight footprint as it is, and they had to have 30. A key part of the brief was that 30 children had to be able to occupy that space. So we were keen not to lose any of the footprint internally. So in the end, we upgraded the roof as well as we could, and then through discussions with building control, they were happy for us not to do any thermal improvements to that existing wall fabric.
Okay, great. Simon Grayson has added a comment that he said great consideration from the user's perspective, especially for the pupils, which is just backing what we were saying earlier. And a question from Jamie saying,
hello?
Hello?
Oh, sorry, I lost you there.
Yeah, sorry. A question from Jamie was just, you may have mentioned this, was it one from competition, self-initiated, or were you approached from the school directly?
No, it was an invited competition. There were 3 practices invited. And then I didn't really have time to touch on it here, but one of the great things about this project was how much it evolved from our competition scheme to the finished result. It really was a wonderfully kind of rewarding process working with the client team. And we had a series of workshops after winning the competition where the design evolved a lot, and they were really actively and passionately involved throughout. I think any architects listening in will know that those kind of projects are pretty rare, but it really was one where the client team, the contractor team, there was just so much goodwill on the project to get it through. We felt just really lucky to be a part of it. There was kind of not a crossed word or wire along the way, really.
Excellent. How rare. Well, thank you very much indeed for your presentation, Tom. Absolutely beautiful project that seems to speak for itself anyway. You've been very clear with your presentation, and it's so self-explanatory. Congratulations on it. We must move on now to our 3rd presentation from our sponsors, and this is coming from Bowder and Chris Roddick, their Greenproof product manager. Chris Roddick is a Green Roof product manager at Bowder, responsible for the development and management of its range of green and blue roof systems with over 20 years experience. He's on the Green Roof Organisation, on the board of the Green Roof Organisation, and was one of the authors of the 2021 Green Roof Organisation Code. The building he's talking about is the Centre for Agriculture and Biosciences International in Wallingford, which was actually covered in the current issue of PiP as part of the special report on office spaces. CABI is an international intergovernmental non-for-profit organisation improving people's lives worldwide by providing information and applying scientific expertise to solving problems in agriculture and the environment, which includes crops lost to pests and diseases. They work in 40 countries around the world, but as I said, based in Oxfordshire. The client's objectives for this new HQ was to construct an eco building that made a statement whilst also blending into the surrounding AONB. They appointed Scott Brownrigg to produce this low carbon passive conditioned building with a huge sweeping green roof, which I'm sure that Chris is about to take us through. Chris, off you go.
Thank you very much for that. Hoping everybody can see my screen now. Let's just share that. There we go. Yeah, we're all good. So yeah, sustainability that makes a statement. I think from my point of view, well, it was interesting with the introduction. I'll have to amend some of my slides now. They've been gazumped by that intro. Let me just go through what we're going to cover today.
Not trying to steal your thunder.
No. It's just that I've carefully to the second worked out my my presentation, and now suddenly you've told them everything I was going to tell them. So let me just see if I can't get this. Here we go. Yeah. So looking at what we're going to cover today, it's really just making sure that we've got that when we're looking to install green roofs, that they really make a difference and improve the buildings that they're being put on. I think from Bowder's point of view, Bowder have been involved in the design and building of green roofs for about the last 25 years in the UK, and we're constantly seeing those roofs develop from very simple systems to really now quite complicated green roofs, and trying to integrate them more fully with the buildings that they work with is really key. So as we, I'm just having a little bit of trouble with this screen. Not quite. There we go. As we said, CABI is a not-for-profit organisation that concentrates on agricultural sort of teaching and research, based down in Wallingford, near the Thames there. I won't go through the rest of the background because we've already covered that. But from our point of view, from Bowder's point of view, we're very used to designing green roofs onto educational buildings to really make a statement. And it's easy to see that with planning changing, with the emphasis on greener buildings, it's really easy to start to see that green roofs have got to do a little bit more than just be quite nice to look at. We've got to produce really important environmental benefits. We've got to allow SUDs to come into play and to reduce the water runoff from these roofs. We've got to now, for many sites, we've got urban greening factors to fulfill, or we've got coming up, I think later on this year, we're going to see biodiversity net gain come into play. And those are going to be things that are going to drive that importance of green infrastructure in our building process. But I think the other thing to say, and I know Tom was dealing with this idea of green roofs and the benefits they have for the people that interact with them. I know Tom was talking about green space at ground level, but equally roofs can really help that sort of biophilic sort of design idea, the idea that you improve people's well-being by allowing them to interact, even if that's only visually, with the green environment, with green infrastructure. So I think increasingly we're going to see roofs that you can see and that are visible, and obviously a pitched roof is an easy way of doing that. One of the added advantages, I think, of that, which is something that we is something that we see a problem with flat roofs where the green roof is just hidden away, maybe at the top of a building, and that is that the actual care and long-term maintenance of that roof falls by the wayside because it's just hidden away, nobody sees it. And clearly, if we've got a highly visible green roof, then what we've also got is a commitment to keep that looking good and maintaining it, and that again has that benefit because it improves our well-being by being around it. So the Cabby building does exactly that. One of the things that one of the key design criteria of this building was to really embed it within the landscape. So the idea of that green space going from ground level up onto the roof really was a fundamental design criteria. Pitched roofs have their own issues. Flat roofs are easier to build, and we're very used to doing that. But they are quite hostile. Green roofs in general are quite hostile places. They're quite exposed. There's very little shelter. You've got higher winds. You've got difficulties with water retention, and all of those pretty much are exacerbated when you put a pitch on it. You know, water will flow very quickly down that slope. It will start to cause problems, and you can see here on this roof. I'm hoping that I'm going to get a laser pointer up, and just you can see the slope here and the potential issues that we might have. So the roof, to say at Cabby, the really important thing was that there was no break, that roof came straight down and blended into the environment at ground level. And that, you know, does cause us problems because this pitch gets steeper and steeper. And typically when Bowder, you know, you're very used to designing difficult roofs in challenging positions. And it's normally not that build function that starts to cause a problem. It's the ability to maintain the roof after completion that causes the limitation on the design. So once this roof becomes too steep to walk on, it becomes very difficult to maintain. And if you can't maintain that green roof, then you really can't, you know, it's going to fail. All green roofs will require some maintenance. So a roof that can't be maintained is eventually going to fail. So that's a difficulty to overcome with these pitched roofs. And this kind of emphasizes a little bit of what we're looking at. So you can see that the structure here was a lightweight timber deck with a nice curved roof on it, single ply membrane fitted to it, and you can see one of the man-safe posts going in. But you can start to see that slope and that issue with the steepness of it. In terms of the type of vegetation, more and more we're seeing wildflower blanket being put on roofs and biodiverse roofs being built. And you know, there's no doubting that these are very they're very rich in the varieties of species that you can grow, and the benefits to wildlife, and the use of native planting is has a real plus point. But this particular building could only take a very lightweight roof. This particular system is only 44 kg per square meter, Bowder's lightweight system. So it meant that they could put a green roof onto this structure. And because it's sedum, and sedum isn't as biodiverse as obviously native planting and native wildflower blanket, but it is a very, very resilient plant, and it is very, very drought tolerant, and it is very used to growing in very harsh conditions. And this pitched roof here is really quite harsh. So it does make it a very suitable product to use. You can see here, these are little retention strips that are fitted to the roof to hold the blanket in place, to hold the sedum in place, to prevent it moving at all. And that's not a particularly good picture. I realized that as I was going through them. So not particularly clear, but you can see the sedum blanket, and another piece will be fitted in here, and these retention spikes will just prevent it moving. So that's it fitted at the bottom part of the slope. And one of the things that you know, as a company, Bowder would typically say is that once we get to about 25 degrees of slope, we can't normally, that's about the limit of what you can walk on. So at 25 degrees, we're sort of saying, well, that's limit. That's really as steep as you want to build your pitch roof. And this roof down here on this last section, this last 3 or 4 meters section, is well over 30 degrees, maybe 32 degrees or something like that when it gets to the bottom. And typically we'd be saying to the design team, well, that's too steep. You really want to try to reduce that and make it more sustainable for maintenance. But the design team actually came up with quite a nice solution. What they've done here, you can see at the bottom, you've got a thin strip of level ground. And what that means is it means that you can access this strip, you can stand on this strip and reach up quite safely and maintain the first 2 or 3 meters of the roof without any risk of sliding and having problems. So it meant that we could get that slightly steeper build up, and that's quite important. We can't build roofs, green roofs we can't maintain. I can think of numerous examples where really nice green roofs have been installed and then they have slowly deteriorated because of lack of maintenance. The other thing just to kind of emphasize, and that is, on this sort of pitch, these roofs are going to dry out very quickly. You can see this is south facing. It's going to dry very quickly, and it will need irrigation. There's no doubt that this roof would suffer without it. It's we now would always state that a roof, for any sort of green roof, there should be a way of watering that during times of drought. So it's not necessarily that you might need to water it all the time, but as we're probably aware, we haven't had significant rainfall in the UK for probably 4 weeks now, and already we're seeing very, very dry ground, and we're only in April. So that's the initial thoughts, and then I just wanted to sort of talk about how that roof has survived. Actually, maybe just jump back to that slide beforehand. The roof here was installed last Christmas, that sort of time, and the installation was just about finished as we went into the first lockdown. The sedum blanket was left without water through its installation period because the site shut down, and we went through that very, very dry April. I have absolutely no doubt that if we had installed a wildflower blanket, the wildflower blanket would have failed. And it's only the fact that sedum was installed, and sedum is very drought tolerant, that it was able to be effectively recovered after the site became active again. So I think one of the things that is worth saying, and I wouldn't say that I'm a huge sedum fan, but it is true to say that sedum systems are, they do have their place, and they are a really useful way of producing a good green roof. So it's really worth noting that. I think the other thing maybe to talk about when we start talking about establishment is, firstly, obviously, water. Water is so key, particularly through the summer months, to make sure that the roof establishes and beds down. And then it's important to consider how that roof will be watered. I think one of the things that we now say, and it's Bowder's advice has changed, certainly in the last 3 years. I think I wrote guidance a couple of years ago for all of our systems going in to say green roofs will always need some way of being able to water them during times of drought. So that's a really key message to get across. It used to be that when we had seed and blanket and biodiverse roofs, the feeling was that these roofs would struggle on through a drought and recover, and everything was okay. I think that green roofs are an expensive thing to build, and to watch the green roof die slowly through a heat wave because there is no way of being able to water it is a mistake. And so we now recommend that there should be a way of watering that roof. It may well be that that is only a watering point at roof level where temporary irrigation can be fitted should there be a drought. But it's important there is some way of watering a roof. And I say Bowder's advice has changed over the last few years, and that just reflects the changing climates that we have now in the UK. I think the other thing that is probably worth commenting on, and that is making sure that access is always available for the type of maintenance that's going to be required. Green roofs, seed and blanket, like we've seen, probably only needs to be fed once a year, maybe weeded, but it's a relatively maintenance light operation. Wildflower blanket, on the other hand, will have a swath that needs to be cut back in early autumn and that material removed. And again, if we have a very steeply pitched roof, then how the logistics of that would work. At 25 degrees, you can just about walk on that roof. Is it practical to walk around with a strimmer and then collect that material up? Unless there's good edge protection, it probably isn't. So again, really important that access is considered. Even if it's just bringing bags of fertilizers to the roof, if you've got to walk, climb through a cat ladder through a hatch, is that a practical operation? Is that something that can be done? Probably is for a small roof, but not if you're carrying 20 or 30 bags of fertilizer through. So various things that need to be considered and understood. I have kind of rushed through this to a degree, but I think it was we were sliding away with our time a little bit. The Cabby site is a great success. I think the Sedum roof is the right choice here. Many times it wouldn't be, but I think as much because of COVID as anything else, that green roof is a success and blends well into the surrounding landscape, where I think other systems may well have failed, and we would be reinstalling them as we speak. So, as I say, I'm aware that I have chugged through that a good old lick. I wonder if we've got any questions.
Thank you very much indeed. Thanks, Chris. Actually, I mean, my bigger question was, I mean, you've been very clear about the installation of roofs. I only had a couple of questions I wanted to ask. One was, how was this part of a bigger strategy? Because obviously Scott Brownrigg were using this as an exemplar really for kind of workplace design. It's a completely it's got very low occupational densities, and they've effectively got passive conditioning strategies employed in there. How much was this was the specification of the roof kind of built into the bigger program for the building?
The big driver, which I mentioned, was the weight of that roof. The fundamental was that obviously they needed a green roof to fill that brief, but the ability to use a lightweight sedum roof at 44 kg a square meter compared to wildflower or biodiverse or any other type of green roof system, which would weigh 3 or 4 times that amount, 170, 180 kg, and that just makes the roof too heavy, and it means that you're not just changing slightly that roof structure, you're changing it fundamentally, because you have a compound change. You have a trebling of the weight, but then you have to build a more robust structure, but also because you've got that great weight of the roof and you've got quite strong shear loads that want to slide that roof, that green roof, down the building, you then have to reinforce the insulation that sits underneath it. So all the waterproofing has to be mounted off retention battens. So that's another load, which then increases the weight of the roof again. So you start to make, that building might not be practical. And I don't know enough about the engineering on it, but it might well not have been practical to be a timber decked roof if you'd had to put such a heavy system onto it.
And how did the design of the roof actually kind of contribute to kind of lack in thermal gain of the building?
Well, it's orientated east-west, and the green roofs are very effective at reducing that urban heat island effect and cooling buildings down. So the reduction in temperature at roof level underneath the green roof will be really quite marked. If we take a day, today's a really good example. It's nice and sunny outside with a dark charcoal grey membrane. The roof temperature probably is too hot to put your hand down on, and that would be feeding heat directly into the building. Once you cover that with a green roof, that temperature is going to drop down by down to low mid-teens at this time of year, and so the amount of impact thermally on the building is greatly reduced. I'm not sure how interested you are in this, but one of the things that we've done now within the green roofing sort of lobby, and that is to change the guidance on green roofs. So we're now looking to be able to incorporate any thermal capacity that the green roof has within the envelope of the building, so it can be considered. Previously, it hasn't been able to be considered, so that's not live yet, but that will be a live concern in the future.
Okay, Chris. I'll ask you to rattle through these questions quickly.
Okay.
Put them over. One's from Colin. It concerns terrace access and clip-on wires and balustrading. I suppose it's additional costs related to that, to access and maintenance. What's the thinnest growing medium for green roofs? Coming from Terry Vanner. And from Deeper, how is water provided on this roof in terms of sprinkler systems, I assume, of some sort?
Okay, so let me try and do those in the order they came up. So edge protection here, because of the design concept, they weren't keen at all on edge protection. So what they have is a central man-safe system. But because you are on a pitched roof that has I want to say carabiner, it's not a carabiner, but it's a locking system that prevents you sliding down the roof as you're hooked onto that main support wire. So that was how that was solved. In terms of the green roof and the thinnest system that you can have, this Bowder system is only sort of 40 millimeters in depth. Typically, GROW recommendations would look at a substrate depth of about 80 millimeters. And this is a lightweight system designed particularly for this sort of building. So it's and it's important probably just to emphasize, sedum is the only plant that you're going to be able to grow on these very thin substrates because of its habitat, because of its background. British wildflowers tend to need 100 millimeters of deep substrate and a much heavier system. And finally, the last question was, and I can't remember it now.
Water supply. How does it get?
Oh, okay. So yeah, and you probably I know you're seeing drone footage at the moment, but if you look closely at the roof, you could see maybe some slight horizontal lines across it.
Yeah.
On top of the sedum, we have fitted drip line irrigation. So these are lines of irrigation pipe that just drip very gently through, normally at night, to water that roof. And you do not want to use sprinklers ideally on a green roof because of the high winds, and you can imagine with this building, if you had sprinklers on, people walking along at the ground level would suddenly be covered in water if the wind was blowing in the wrong direction. And they're also very, very poor at, they waste an awful lot of water, sprinkler systems. So drip line irrigations typically only drip at something like 1 or 2 litres per hour per metre. So they're very, very economic, and they put all the water onto the roof. So from an ecological point of view, that's certainly the sort of irrigation system that you need.
Well, thank you very much indeed, Chris. I apologise, I'm running really late now, and a drip feed system sounds like a lovely way of irrigating it anyway. Moving swiftly on, apologies to Julia. We're running really late, but it's just been interesting conversations to be had. I apologise. Yes, Barfield, Managing Director at Marks Barfield, founded in '89 with the late husband David Marks. They're a multi-award winning practice with a portfolio of work across many sectors, and famous not least for their vision for the London Eye and Brighton's I360. The recent projects of the Cambridge Central Mosque in Cambridge, with sustainability at its heart, and Stevenson House in London, a workplace exemplar of biophilic design. Julia's on the steering group of Architects Declare and lectures regularly on design, construction, sustainability. Should we be talking about the University of Cambridge Primary School? So apologies for being so late. Thank you for hanging on, Julia. And,
that's all right.
Tell us all. Thank you.
So I'll just share my screen. Which one shall I share? This one. Need to share the view. Okay, so I'm going to start talking about the University of Cambridge Primary School. It was part of a bigger project by the University of Cambridge to create a whole new neighbourhood in the northwest side of Cambridge, a development that's now called Eddington. And it was the first university training school in the country. So that's a bit like a university training hospital, but for a school. It's obviously primarily for teaching children, but also for teacher training and education research. And right from the beginning, we decided that we really wanted to work really, really closely with the educators, obviously the educators from the Department of Education at Cambridge University, and we wanted the education ethos and principles to lead the design. So it was a 3-form entry primary school with a nursery, as well as the additional university training elements. So a very big school. I mean, often you could have more than 800 souls in the building. So yes, a very big school. So these are the core education principles that came from the university, that it should be, and in particular from a client representative who we worked with, Dame Alison Peacock, and she was very clear that it should be very democratic, every voice mattering. There should be a balance between rigor and freedom, inward looking but nurturing independence, that it should be a forest school, and because it was so big, that it should be able to be divided into smaller communities, and that it should have a strong presence, and that learning should take place everywhere. Obviously, because it was a part of the university, we really did a lot of research, even though there was a very short period of time. We did a lot of historical research, looking at Herman Hertzberger, the École de Plein d'Air, the Jacobsen in Denmark, and we tried to learn and indeed Walter Gropius's only UK building, which is in Impington College, just outside Cambridge. We also researched contemporary schools, and we were pointed in the direction of the Finnish system, which was also quite influential, as well as looking at that wonderful school, the kindergarten in Japan. We also did a lot of school visits with our client representative, with Dame Alison Peacock, and we find that really, really useful, visiting schools in situ, because those conversations that you have, at the schools and on the train really develop the kind of trust and relationships between ourselves and the clients, and we learn so much from that, as do they, I think. So then jointly we produced this kind of design response, which was that all of the classrooms should have a direct level access to the outside, that we should create clusters of classrooms so that they should have a kind of smaller communities within a bigger community, and that they should be articulated so that there was all different types of learning able to happen in one classroom, and that it should be very open and accessible. So we started with the kind of building block of any school, which was looking at the classroom itself and all the different types of learning that could happen within it. And I won't talk about each one because you know, we don't have the time, but it was very much influenced by Hermann Hertzberger's idea of this articulated classroom. So, and then when you take the building block of the classroom and start putting it together, then two classrooms can form what we've called a learning street. And then you create a cluster of 6 classrooms, but at the same time wanting to avoid dead ends so that everyone feels part of a whole. And that's really where the idea of the kind of circle came from, of the putting the clusters around the a space that was the heart of the school. And but everyone should feel part of that whole. Obviously, there are precedents that we looked at in the courtyards of the Cambridge colleges, but also the village colleges. At the bottom, you can see the which are a further education tradition of Cambridge. And then we looked at the kind of whole typology of circular buildings, which actually happen historically and in many different cultures. So obviously, when we design from the inside out, but also we have to design from the outside in and make sure that the school has a civic presence in the master plan. So we located the main kind of building block of the school, which was the double height space, where we put all the UTS space and we had the double height hall and the offices. We placed that very prominently on the site, in line with what's now Turing Way. And then we created this courtyard, but the difference between this courtyard and possibly the courtyards in the university is that this is enclosing but not closed, that it opens up also to the landscape and to the playgrounds. So this is how the school is organised in terms of the uses. There's a series of 3 building learning clusters, which have 6 classrooms each. And then there's in addition to that, there's the reception and nursery area, the early years, which are slightly separate. And then in the double height space, as I said, the hall, the dining and all of the UTS and office areas. And what was interesting, because the circle is actually quite an efficient use of space and circulation, we were also able to provide a dining hall, which isn't usually in the brief. Usually in schools, they have to use the hall as the dining hall, but because of the efficiency of the circle, and we put all of the external circulation on the outside, because in the cloister around the central courtyard, we were able then to provide this dining hall. And actually this external cloister circulation has been very, very helpful in COVID, and has made, because the idea was always that you move around the central courtyard, you don't move around the learning street. That's actually a learning space. It's actually proved very, very, I mean, the school has responded incredibly well to COVID restrictions and the need for fresh air. And that was one of the key elements that allowed that to happen. So this is one of the clusters with 6 classrooms, and you can see what we've done is we've created this learning street in between the classrooms. And we have group rooms that for specialist, smaller learning, separate from the main classrooms, but also this learning street, which is a key element. So this is one of the classrooms looking out towards the courtyard, and that's another view. That's actually the art room looking out towards the classroom, and this is the learning street. So the idea of learning happening everywhere really does happen, and this learning street allows for the interaction of different classes as well, because that was one of the things that was mentioned by the by our kind of client, was that, you know, that this openness was key to making it work as a university training school and education training school, so that the classrooms have no doors, and they get used to the fact that there's adults moving around, observing what's going on, and also there's this interaction, as I say, between teachers and pupils of different ages, which was something that was really, they were really keen to encourage. So in terms of sustainability, that was a very key element of the school. We have 25% of the plan is PVs, so it actually generates almost as much energy as it needs. Although I have to say, when we went back to the school, we discovered that they hadn't actually turned it on, so we needed to, in post-occupancy, we were actually quite useful in making sure that that was working. But there was the idea of also having these covered outdoor areas outside each classroom where they could, where learning could continue. So this is the ventilation strategy, which has been very helpful in terms of COVID, where the fresh air comes in through the classrooms and then enters with the benefit of stack effect at the top level in the learning street. And in the communal block, where the natural ventilation is continued and exits through at high level and into the dining hall and the UTS space as well. So this is the brickwork on the outside of the main hall, which is open for the with a pattern for the natural ventilation. And then this is the PVs, as I said, that take up 25% of the roof footprint. The multi-purpose hall is very flexible. It can open. It can either be enclosed for children's assemblies, etc. But it can also open up. So the diagram on bottom left shows how the whole thing can open up into the dining hall and then open up ultimately into the courtyard. So, I mean, in all of these things, we've tried to provide a very flexible school that can be used in many different ways. This is another view of the hall. So you can see the timber at the rear. This is where all the air comes through. And then we have a very special feature, which is this window, which is on line with Turing Way. And we discovered quite early on that next door to this site is the Department of Astronomy, and they are mapping the Milky Way. So we asked them for an image to put on in the school of the Milky Way. And it's very nice when you visit the school and the head teacher kind of refers to, you know, is able to refer to that as a kind of learning tool, but it's also quite beautiful. So this is the dining hall, which we were able to provide on top of what is normally provided in schools. And this kind of idea of interage learning and interage dining is very much present and part of the school. They invite older people to come in and to eat with the children, but also even on normal days, the children all eat together of different ages. This is the university training part of it, which is on the first floor. And that too is very flexible and can either be divided into 3 different spaces, 2 spaces, or 1 space. So this is the courtyard that we created, which also has a kind of space for performance in it. And it's used again in many different ways. So at the top there's their village fete, the school fete, and then there's teaching going on and in the bottom image. And what the circle has enabled us to do, because we managed to hold on to the roofs over the gaps, which was and they were in danger at one point through value engineering, but we managed to keep on to them. What it's done is that it's given the school just a really generous amount of covered outdoor learning, which they use to the full, so that on a rainy day they don't have to all go into the hall, which is the normal thing to do. They can all stay outside and have the fresh air, even though it's raining outside. And again, this is just on the bottom left, there's an example of each classroom has a place where they can grow things, and there's also that facility in the playground as well. So this shows how the school could be adapted in the future. I mean, if they wanted to add an extra class for it to become a four-formentary school, for example, they could push the nursery out and add a further 6 classrooms in there. And this just to show how the clusters can be grouped in different ways, either with divided into year groups, or you can have a cluster of 6 with 1 year group from each age. And that's just something that obviously that the head teacher can decide. And this is really just showing, I mean, it is a steel frame building, but I think that what's important is to note that it's because it's a framed building that they can actually move walls in the future if they need to be. And in the landscape, we work very closely with the landscape architect. So we've created, he created some orchard areas, some growing areas where the kids can grow vegetables. We have a wildwood as well as the kind of normal sports facilities. And so the landscape is really important. It's where a lot of learning goes on outside. Because it is a forest school. And in the top left, you can see that the rainwater from the roof runs down this pipe and into this brill that is that is part of the landscape. So we don't capture the rainwater as such, but it's kind of integrated into the play of the playground. Oh dear, there just seems to have stopped sharing. Yes. Oh, okay. Okay. So then this is just, what was really nice was that we also worked with an artist, so a young emerging artist called Ruth Proctor. And I mentioned that they were very keen, I mean, being the university, you know, they obviously have links, global links all over the world. And Ruth came up with this lovely idea, which was that there should be pictures taken from all over the world of the sky. And they are part of the covering for the cloister. So the idea was that we're all under the same sky, and they're also, because of course the part of the circle that's orientated towards the south does get additional solar gain, so it also forms part of that to protect the south-facing classrooms. But it's very, you just walk around and you just see the sky that we're taking at the same time, of the same, you know, on one day all around the world. So I mentioned that we discovered that the PVs weren't working. That was because we took the office to see the school a couple of years ago, and they said everything was wonderful except it was expensive. Their bills were very expensive, and then we found out subsequently that the PVs hadn't been turned on correctly, so hopefully that's been sorted out. Yes, and thank you very much. I mean, I think one of the lessons learned is the fact that it has actually responded very well to the COVID situation. The headmaster called me up and asked me to help him explain how it worked to parents. So I sent him an explanation, because each classroom also has a CO2 monitor. so that when it goes above a certain amount, 1,000 parts per million, then a red light comes on and then they know to open the windows. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Julia. Great presentation. Lovely looking school. I've not yet been to it. We did cover it in RIBAJ. I was kind of intrigued about the idea of the circle, because it's quite funny. Conceptually, it's very democratizing, but actually there is it also internalizes. And I wonder how much the externalization of the school is to do with the landscape rather than the building itself, because I just wonder really also, are things like the security of the school, were those issues when it came to the idea of how that school engages with the external realm on its outer faces rather than inner faces?
Well, I mean, security is dealt with fencing around the edge, if that's what you mean. You know, there's 3 entrances, so parents can come from 3 different directions. And, you know, one of the ideas was that that the parents there should be a kind of quite a relaxed relationship between parents and the teachers, for example, that parents should be able to go to the classrooms all around, because that kind of conversation between a parent and a teacher that doesn't need to, that informal conversation is actually can be quite important to avoid issues in the future. And this just, well, I suppose other forms would enable it to do the same thing. But I mean, I know that there was quite a lot of resistance to the idea of a circle, and certainly not what we thought at the beginning. You know, we were surprised that it ended up as a circle, but it was very much part of the rigorous process that we took in saying, you know, taking their aims and then translating it into architecture. So it wasn't something that we had in our minds at all. It was just something that emerged from the process. But it's actually worked incredibly well, and it's got future flexibility and adaptability as well, as I said.
You mentioned the increased flexibility, which a couple of people were asking about. There have been a couple of questions from Dennis Hellier and I believe someone else who were talking about your acoustic. Obviously, those are open spaces. There were what I thought were acoustic panels up on the high walls there of the Learning Street. Is that the case?
Yes. The Learning Street was very carefully designed from the acoustic point of view. I mean, so we obviously had an acoustician, and there are acoustic boards all the way around. The openings to the classrooms are offset, so there's never the noise never kind of goes straight into another classroom. Yes, so it was just carefully engineered in terms of acoustic engineering. That it doesn't, it isn't a problem, and that's been confirmed by the head teacher now, because it's been in operation 3-4 years. But it gives them this extra space to do, you know, extraordinary things, because it's not a corridor. You know, you don't, you know, that's all happening on the, you know, in the main courtyard. It's actually a learning space, and it's a learning space that can either be intimate, you know, to one-to-one, or it can be, you know, small group work. And, you know, this idea of learning happening everywhere was something that we really were very keen to do. But also the head teacher that we worked with, this Dame Alison Peacock, who was absolutely amazing. She completely turned around a failing school, and now she runs, she's very senior. Well, she was made a dame in the process that when we were seeing her. She was very keen that the teachers should continue to learn all the time too, not just the teacher training element, which was, you know, additional element that was put on this, but that, you know, in a lot of schools, teachers close themselves off, you know, and they put all of the children's artwork over the door, you know, and the windows, so that and you can't do that here, because it's got this spirit of openness that's really quite important to the whole ethos of learning that the Department of Education has at Cambridge, which is very progressive.
And being a forest school, there's also this engagement with the external environment. I mean, both in the internal, which, I mean, the internal part of the circle, which is effectively circulatory, it seems to me, and then that landscape you have on the outside. So there's just this, when you talk about openness, it also seems to be openness about extension of the school, both internally to the courtyard and outside to the landscape beyond on the external.
Yeah, oh, absolutely. That's absolutely key. So, yes, so so each classroom has its own covered external teaching areas on the outside and the inside. Well, on the inside it is the cloister, but yeah, that's very much part of it. So they have their individual learning for the classrooms, but also there's a huge amount of learning that goes on in the landscape. That was very much part of it. As I said, it was a forest school. In its ethos.
No, it's fantastic. I mean, it looks great. I mean, it looks huge. I mean, it's the idea of how one actually creates intimacy really in a school that seems that big. Do you get that sense? Is intimacy created within these learning clusters? Because it feels like a school.
Yeah, no, well, that was another important point. This kind of the idea that there should be nooks and crannies. And that's also something that, you know, happens within the classrooms. You know, there's even within the classrooms, it's not, you know, it is unusual in that it has this articulated classroom. So within the classroom, there's different areas where different types of teaching can happen, either group work or individual work, and in the learning street as well. So there's very many different types of space that is created that can be used in different ways, and that's I think very unusual, and particularly with you can see with the openings, they're all staggered so that there's no direct. I mean, I should have a slide. We did have a slides which just showed the acoustics, because that comes up a lot, but it was all worked out. To make sure that there wasn't that noise getting out.
No, it's a lovely school.
It was a great project to work on.
No, it looks like it's really beautiful. I mean, I love the idea that, you know, this street is actually kind of teaching pupils in a sense about the kind of idea of public space, really. I mean, the idea of creating a street and begin to learn that that's where you engage and where you kind of speak, and it's a kind of a public forum that's outside of the privacy, say, of your individual class. Is learning kind of, it's not just about democracy, it's about teaching children about the nature of democracy and the nature of kind of the public realm within a democratic society, which is what I think is the bigger thing that we're talking about here.
Yeah, well, absolutely. That's that you've hit the nail on the head. I mean, that's what the head teacher keeps on talking about, this democracy. Now he's working very interestingly, part of his research going on is responding to the climate emergency, but also to the you know, the challenges to our democracy that are happening from social media and all over the place. And so, yeah, he's directly addressing that. So it's a very interesting environment that they're trying to be kind of cutting edge in terms of thinking, and hopefully the architecture helps that.
Well, thank you so much indeed for presenting it, Julia. I do need to wrap this up now. I'm so appallingly over time now, actually. I hope I hope people have found it interesting. I've been thoroughly engaged by all the presentations. I think basically, just to sum up, is the idea that the great things are buildings that actually work as a pedagogical tool. So, you know, we've been seeing here urban environments are playgrounds too. That's from one speaker. The idea that outside learning, such as at Leicester, is part of a wider curriculum, as we've seen at the Leicester project. The visual use of materials at Hackney School of Food by Simon Weston, a brilliant one. And I suppose that ultimately the idea that form represents part of the democratic principles of our society, which we're seeing exactly here with the Cambridge School. Even in the little details of dichroic foil, for instance, or film actually being used to kind of project skies, it's the idea that the building itself, or the best buildings, educational buildings, are ones that you don't learn in, but ones that you learn from. And I think if we can take that away from today's seminar, I think we've all learned a really big a big and important fact. I would like to thank again our speakers, Tim Gill, Satna Shah, Tom Sermon and Julia Barfield for giving us their time. It was fantastic speaking to you and for introducing your projects to us again. And to our sponsors, Rockwell's Justin Lewis, VMZINC's Jonathan Lowy and Bowder's Chris Roddick. Thank you for your time too and your ongoing sponsorship of these PiP seminars. I suppose we should round up at 12:15 and 55 minutes over time, but thank you all indeed for attending and thank you very much indeed for your presentations. And hopefully we'll see you soon again in another PiP seminar. Thank you very much indeed.